In 1938, a West Virginia coal baron's daughter married her own uncle, and the local pastor blessed the union. The Harlan family didn't just own land in Appalachia. They were the land. Their coal mines stretched beneath 3 counties, their money built the churches, and their name appeared on every deed, every ballot, every tombstone in the valley. But the Harlans had a rule that no outsider understood until it was too late. The blood must remain pure. For over a century, the family patriarch enforced marriages between cousins, uncles, and nieces, not out of ignorance, but out of deliberate, calculated design. They believed their wealth, their power, and their superiority depended on it. By the late 1930s, whispers began to spread through the mining towns. Children born into the Harlan estate looked different. Some had eyes that never focused. Others never learned to speak. A few were hidden entirely, locked in the upper floors of the mansion, where their screams blended with the wind howling through the hollow. The family patriarch, Samuel Harlan III, had personally rewritten the family Bible, inserting passages that justified intermarriage as God's design for the chosen. He preached it from the pulpit he funded. He enforced it with the sheriff he owned. The mansion itself seemed to absorb the family's decay. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood and coal dust, even in rooms that hadn't seen a fire in years. Portraits lined the hallways, children with hollow cheeks and vacant stares, their names crossed out in the family records. Locals refused to deliver mail there after dark. What happens when an entire bloodline becomes a crime scene? In 1952, a county doctor examined 3 Harlan children and found genetic mutations he'd only seen in lab rats, the result of at least 4 generations of inbreeding. He reported it to the state. His office burned down 2 nights later. No investigation followed. The Harlans weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable. Their legacy mirrors modern dynasties, wealthy families who marry within tight social circles, preserving power at any cost. The Rothschilds, the DuPonts, even certain political families have faced whispers of keeping it in the family. But the Harlans took it further. They made it doctrine. If you had the power to rewrite history, would you use it to hide your sins or repeat them? The blood must remain pure. The Harlan mansion stood for another 40 years after Samuel's death. In 1994, a photographer exploring abandoned estates broke through a cellar door no one knew existed. Inside, he found 37 portraits of children, names, dates, causes of death. None of them appeared in any public record. None of them had graves. But one portrait was different. It was dated 1955, 3 years after the last known Harlan birth. The child in the painting had been aged digitally, as if someone had tried to imagine what they would look like today. But one secret was still waiting in the walls, and it wasn't about the past. The photographer thought he'd found art, until he realized every child in the portraits had the same father. Michael Torres didn't believe in curses. He believed in real estate. In 1994, the abandoned Harlan mansion was listed for sale at a price that seemed almost suspicious, $40,000 for a 12-bedroom estate on 60 acres. He'd planned to photograph it for a coffee table book on Appalachian architecture. But when his flashlight beam cut through the darkness of that hidden cellar, his book became evidence. The portraits weren't painted. They were photographs hand-tinted, mounted in identical frames, arranged in rows like a gallery. Each one showed a child between the ages of 3 and 12. Below each image, a copper plate engraved with a name, a birth date, and a death date. Every child had died before their 13th birthday, every single one. The causes varied: pneumonia, fall, fever, but the handwriting on the plates was identical. Someone had cataloged them like specimens. Torres pulled out his camera. The air in the cellar tasted metallic like old pennies left in a jar. Dust moved in the beam of his flashlight even though there was no wind. As he photographed the portraits, he noticed something that made his hands shake. The children's faces shared the same features, the same narrow-set eyes, the same prominent jaw, the same widow's peak. They weren't just related. They looked like siblings, twins even, across 70 years. In the corner of the cellar, Torres found a leather journal. Inside, Samuel Harlan III had documented every birth, every union, and every defect in clinical detail, like a breeder documenting livestock. The entries were chilling in their precision. Subject 14, male, born February 1931. Father, Samuel Harlan III. Mother, Margaret Harlan. Daughter, cleft palate, weak limbs, died age 4. The journal spanned 1897 to 1955, 58 years of deliberate, documented inbreeding. Samuel hadn't just allowed it. He'd engineered it, tracking bloodlines like a geneticist, adjusting pairings to achieve some twisted ideal of purity. If you discovered proof of a crime that no one alive committed, would you expose it, or let the dead keep their secrets? Torres called the county historical society. They told him the Harlan family had no living descendants. The last known member, a woman named Evelyn Harlan, had died in a psychiatric facility in 1979. But when Torres examined the journal's final entry, his blood went cold. It was dated December 1955, and it read, Subject 37, female, born October 1955. Father, Samuel IV. Mother, Evelyn Harlan, healthy. Placed with external family, name changed, location concealed. This mirrors modern cases of elite family cover-ups, the Duplessis orphans in Canada, where children were hidden and experimented on, or the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, where unwanted births were erased from records. Power doesn't just corrupt, it erases. Every child had the same father. Torres spent 3 months trying to find Subject 37. He filed Freedom of Information requests, combed through adoption records, contacted genealogists. Nothing. But then he received an unmarked envelope at his apartment, no return address, no postmark. Inside, a single photograph of a woman, roughly 40 years old, standing in front of a Virginia courthouse. On the back, written in faded ink, "She doesn't know who she is, don't tell her." The woman's face was unmistakable, the widow's peak, the narrow-set eyes, the prominent jaw. But someone didn't want her found, and they knew Torres was looking. The woman in the photograph had been dead for 15 years, but her bank account was still active. Michael Torres stared at the unmarked photo for 3 days before he made his first mistake. He showed it to someone. Dr. Ellen Reeves, a genealogist specializing in Appalachian families, met him at a diner in Charleston. She took one look at the photograph and her coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Torres explained the seller, the journal, subject 37 doctor. Reeves pulled out her phone and showed him a death certificate dated 1979 for a woman named Catherine Brennan. Same face, same widow's peak, same narrow-set eyes. The certificate listed cause of death as suicide, but the photograph Torres received was dated 1994. Torres drove to the Virginia courthouse in the background of the photo. The clerk recognized the building immediately. Fairfax County, built in 1892, demolished in 1998. That narrowed the timeline. He filed requests for property records, marriage licenses, anything tied to the name Catherine Brennan. He found nothing. No birth certificate, no social security number, no tax records. Catherine Brennan had died in 1979, but according to the federal government, she'd never been born. The rain started as Torres left the courthouse. Heavy, cold, the kind that soaks through your coat in seconds. He sat in his car, windows fogging, and opened the journal again. Samuel Harlan's handwriting was precise, almost surgical. Subject 37, removed from estate October 1955. Assumed name Catherine Brennan. Placement external guardian, identity protected. Bloodline status monitored, not abandoned, not forgotten. Watched. Torres found a bank statement tucked inside the journal's back cover, dated 1993. Monthly deposits of $2,000 from an account registered to Harlan Family Trust. The recipient, C. Brennan. Someone had been paying her for decades. A woman who didn't legally exist had been receiving money from a family that officially had no living members. Torres called the bank. They told him the account was closed in 1995, 1 year after he'd found the seller. The final withdrawal, $87,000, transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Then, silence. If someone erased you from history but kept you alive, would you even know you'd been stolen? This wasn't just about inbreeding. It was about control that transcended death. The Harlan family had done what powerful families have always done: they adapted. When the bloodline became too visible, too dangerous, they hid it. They changed names, falsified records, paid for silence. It mirrors modern cases like the Rockefeller heir who lived under a fake identity for years, or the Swiss banking families who concealed illegitimate children across Europe. Power doesn't die. It just learns to whisper. Torres found one more clue in the journal. A single line written in different ink, added years later. CB married 1977. Husband Daniel Marsh. One child, 1978, female. If subject 37 had a daughter, that daughter would be 16 in 1994, 27 now in 2005. The bloodline hadn't ended, it had hidden. Dead for 15 years, bank account still active. Torres tried to find Daniel Marsh. He found a grave instead. Car accident, 1982. Single vehicle crash on a mountain road outside Beckley, West Virginia, 20 miles from the old Harlan estate. No witnesses. The police report listed it as driver error. But Torres noticed something. The accident happened 3 days after Daniel Marsh had contacted a lawyer about accessing his wife's sealed adoption records. Catherine Brennan disappeared 6 months later. Her death certificate said suicide. No body was ever found. But her daughter, subject 37's daughter, was placed in foster care. The records were sealed. The case was closed. And someone, somewhere, was still making sure it stayed that way. The foster care file had been flagged, "Do not disclose," by a judge who died in 1960. Michael Torres wasn't a detective. He was a photographer who'd stumbled into a nightmare. But when he filed a Freedom of Information request for the daughter's foster records, he received something he didn't expect: a hand-delivered rejection letter. Not mailed, hand-delivered to his apartment, by someone who knew exactly where he lived. The letter was typed on official Virginia Department of Social Services letterhead, but the signature was illegible. The message was clear: this matter is closed. Further inquiry will be considered harassment. Torres called the department. They had no record of sending the letter. They had no record of the case number referenced. When Torres read the case number aloud, the clerk went silent for 11 seconds. Then she said, "Sir, that classification hasn't been used since 1959. The file wasn't just sealed. It had been sealed using a system that no longer existed, a Cold War-era protocol reserved for witness protection and national security cases." Why would a child born in 1978 be classified under a 1950s protection system? Torres couldn't sleep. The rain outside his window sounded like fingernails tapping glass. He opened his laptop and started searching obituaries, court records, anything tied to the name Daniel Marsh. Then he found it. A single newspaper clipping from the Beckley Register, November 1982. Daniel Marsh's obituary mentioned, survived by wife Catherine and daughter Emma. But 3 weeks later, a correction was printed. The daughter's name was removed, just erased. No explanation. Tours found Emma Marsh's foster placement record buried in a county archive, digitized but mislabeled as Property Dispute 1983. She'd been placed with a family in Richmond. The file included a medical note. Patient exhibits signs of premature aging. Genetic testing recommended. Premature aging. At 5 years old. The same phrase appeared in Samuel Harlan's journal when describing Subject 12, Subject 19, and Subject 23. The genetic collapse wasn't just historical. It was inherited. Emma Marsh carried the Harlan bloodline, 4 generations of inbreeding compressed into her DNA. And someone knew. Someone had been watching her since birth. Tours found the foster family's address. He drove to Richmond, hands gripping the wheel too tight, eyes checking the rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The house was a small colonial in a quiet suburb. A woman answered the door, mid-60s, kind eyes, the smell of cinnamon and coffee drifting from inside. "Can I help you?" Tours asked about Emma Marsh. The woman's face drained of color. "I don't know anyone by that name." She started to close the door. Tours wedged his foot in the frame. "Please. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need to know if she's safe. If you raised a child you knew was being hunted, would you erase her or teach her to run?" The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then she whispered, "They told us never to use that name. They said if anyone came asking, we were supposed to call a number." Tours felt ice crawl down his spine. "Did you call it?" The woman shook her head. "The number stopped working in 1991. We haven't heard from anyone since." She paused. "Emma left when she turned 18. Said she needed to find out who she really was. That was 1996. I haven't seen her since." This is the dark side of systems meant to protect, witness protection programs that lose contact with their subjects, foster systems that prioritize secrecy over safety. It mirrors real cases like the WITSEC program failures, where protected witnesses were killed because outdated protocols failed, or the Dozier School for Boys, where children in state care were abused, erased, and buried in unmarked graves. Power protects itself first. The vulnerable come last. Sealed by a judge who died in 1960. Tours asked the foster mother one final question. "Did Emma ever say where she was going?" The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She said she found an address in her mother's belongings, an estate in West Virginia. She wanted to see where she came from." Tours felt his stomach drop. "When was this?" The woman's voice cracked. 1996, October. She called me once after she left. Said the house was abandoned but something felt wrong, like she was being watched." Tours pulled out his phone, hands shaking. "Did she call again?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "No, but 2 months later I got a package, no return address. Inside was Emma's necklace, a silver locket her mother gave her. It was bent, broken, like someone had stepped on it. There was no note, no explanation, just the locket and a single strand of hair taped to the inside of the box. The DNA test came back impossible. The hair belonged to someone who shared 96% of Emma's genes. Tours couldn't let it go. The broken locket haunted him. He kept the strand of hair taped inside, preserved in a plastic evidence bag he bought from a forensics supply store. For 2 years, it sat in his desk drawer while he tried to move on, tried to photograph other buildings, other stories. but every abandoned mansion he entered smelled like damp wood and coal dust. Every cellar door felt like a trap waiting to spring. In 1998, commercial DNA testing became available to the public. Tours sent the hair to a lab in California, along with a swab from inside the locket where Emma's skin cells might have transferred. The results arrived 3 weeks later in a plain manila envelope. He opened it standing in his kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter. The lab report stated the hair sample showed genetic similarity consistent with parent-child or full sibling relationship. However, markers indicate identical mitochondrial DNA with anomalous duplication patterns. In layman's terms, the hair belonged to someone who was simultaneously Emma's sister, her mother, and genetically almost identical to her. The lab had flagged it as contamination. They assumed Torres had mixed samples, but he hadn't. There had only been one hair, one test. The report included a note from the geneticist. These markers are consistent with multi-generational inbreeding, at least 4 consecutive generations. I've only seen this pattern once before in a 1972 study of an isolated religious community in Utah. Torres found the 1972 study. It documented a fundamentalist sect where fathers married daughters for 3 generations. Every child born after generation 3 showed severe physical deformities, cognitive impairment, and a condition the researchers called genetic echo, where DNA became so compressed that siblings could appear nearly identical at a molecular level. The Harlan bloodline had achieved the same result, but they'd done it deliberately, methodically, for over a century. Emma Marsh wasn't just the product of inbreeding. She was the endpoint, a genetic dead end where the family tree had collapsed into a single thread. And if the hair in the locket belonged to someone with 96% genetic similarity, that meant one of 2 things. Emma had a twin no one knew about, or someone in the Harlan bloodline was still alive, still reproducing, still perpetuating the cycle. Torres drove back to West Virginia. The Harlan mansion had been demolished in 1997, bulldozed by a development company that planned to build condos. But the foundation remained, and the cellar entrance was still visible beneath a sheet of plywood and caution tape. He climbed down. His flashlight beam swept across empty walls. The portraits were gone. The journal was gone. Even the dust seemed different, disturbed, like someone had scrubbed the space clean. If you erased every record, every photograph, every piece of evidence, could you erase the blood itself? But Torres found something the cleanup crew had missed. Carved into the stone wall, barely visible, were initials and dates, dozens of them. EH 1889, MH 1903, SH 1921, and at the bottom, fresh enough that the stone dust hadn't settled, EM 1996. Emma had been here. She'd carved her initials into the same wall where 4 generations of Harlans had marked their existence. This mirrors modern genetic disasters hidden by wealth and power. The Colt family in Australia, where authorities discovered a family living in isolation with 12 children born from 4 generations of incest. Or the Whitaker family in West Virginia, whose genetic disorders from inbreeding were documented but protected from public scrutiny for decades. Society looks away when the truth is too uncomfortable. But the DNA doesn't lie. The blood remembers. 96% genetic match. Impossible but real. Torres photographed the wall. As his flash lit up the carvings, he noticed something else, a seam in the stone, almost invisible, running vertically along the corner. He pressed against it. The wall shifted. Behind it, a narrow passageway, no wider than his shoulders, descending deeper into the earth. The air that rushed out was cold and stale, untouched for years. His flashlight beam couldn't find the bottom. He called out. His voice echoed back, distorted, stretched, like the tunnel was swallowing sound. Then he heard it, faint, rhythmic, the sound of breathing that wasn't his own. Torres turned to run. His foot caught on something metal embedded in the dirt. He looked down. It was a rusted iron ring attached to a chain that disappeared into the passage. He pulled. The chain was taut. Something on the other end was pulling back. And then the breathing stopped. Torres pulled the chain from the dirt and found a leather collar with a name stitched inside. Subject 22. The collar was small, child-sized. The leather was cracked and stained dark brown in places Torres didn't want to think about. His hands were shaking so badly the flashlight beam danced across the passage walls. The breathing had stopped, but now there was something worse. Silence so complete it felt like pressure against his eardrums. He should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to climb back up, seal the passage, call the police. Instead, he stepped inside. The passage descended at a steep angle, the walls narrowing until his shoulders scraped against damp stone. The smell hit him 10 feet down, not decay, but something medicinal. Formaldehyde, bleach, the kind of sterile chemical odor that belongs in hospitals or laboratories. The passage opened into a second cellar, larger than the first, with walls lined in white tile, hospital tile, circa 1940s, cracked and yellowed with age. This wasn't a family crypt. This was an examination room. Metal tables, leather restraints bolted to the floor, cabinets with glass doors still stocked with bottles of disinfectant, syringes sealed in brittle plastic, and jars containing. Tor's flashlight lingered on the shelves. The jars held preserved tissue samples, each labeled with numbers and dates. Subject 18, brain tissue, 1944. Subject 29, bone marrow, 1951. Subject 37, umbilical cord, 1955. Samuel Harlan hadn't just documented the bloodline, he'd collected it, studied it, like a specimen archive. On the largest table, Torres found a leather-bound ledger, different from the journal upstairs. This one was titled Medical Observations and Procedures. Inside, detailed surgical notes, genetic theories, sketches of deformities, and a chilling thesis statement on the first page. To perfect the bloodline, one must first understand its breaking point. Samuel Harlan had been conducting experiments, not just observing the effects of inbreeding, engineering them. The ledger described forced pairings, documented conception dates, tracked developmental abnormalities, and recorded corrective procedures performed on living subjects. Children who showed severe deformities were studied, dissected while alive to observe how their organs had malformed. Those who died were preserved. Those who survived were bred again. Torres felt bile rise in his throat. One entry stood out, dated October 1955. Subject 37 removed from study. Specimen exhibits unexpected resilience. Physical markers minimal. Cognitive function above threshold. Risk of external discovery too high. Placed with guardian under monitored conditions. Breeding potential preserved for future observation. Emma's mother, Catherine Brennan, hadn't been saved. She'd been relocated. The Harlan family had let her go because she was functional enough to reproduce without raising suspicion. They'd monitored her for decades, waiting to see if she'd pass on the genetic collapse. And when she had a daughter in 1978, they'd watched Emma too. If a family treated its own children like lab rats, were they ever really human, or just scientists without ethics? This is the horrifying reality of unchecked power intersecting with pseudoscience. It mirrors the Tuskegee syphilis study, where black men were observed dying without treatment for 40 years, or Unit 731 in Japan, where thousands were vivisected in the name of research, or even the Lebensborn program in Nazi Germany, where children were bred for genetic purity. The Harlans weren't unique. They were just American and isolated, and rich enough that no one questioned what happened behind closed doors. Torres photographed every page. His camera flash lit up the room in bursts, metal tables, restraint straps, jars of tissue. Then his flash caught something else. In the corner of the room, behind a surgical screen, a wooden door newer than everything else with a modern padlock. Subject 22. A child's collar, leather and blood. Torres broke the padlock with a metal pipe he found near the tables. The door swung open. Behind it, a small room maybe 8 feet square with a cot, a bucket and walls covered in writing. Not carved. Written. In pencil pen, what looked like blood, layer upon layer of words, dates, names, all in the same handwriting but aging over time. Some letters were shaky, childlike. Others were precise, adult. The writing said the same thing, over and over, hundreds of times. My name is Emma, I am not subject 37. My name is Emma, I am not. Torres stepped closer. At the bottom of the wall the writing changed. Fresh pencil marks, barely a year old. They told me I was the last. They lied. I can hear her breathing in the walls. Tor's flashlight flickered. When it steadied, he saw it on the cot. A hospital bracelet. Patient name, E. Harlan. Admission date, October 1996. Facility, St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital, Charleston, W.V. Emma hadn't disappeared. She'd been committed. And someone had kept her locked in this room before that. St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital burned down in 1999, 3 years after Emma was admitted, and 2 weeks after Torres started asking questions. Torres drove to Charleston the next morning. He didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those words scratched into the cellar wall. I can hear her breathing in the walls. The hospital bracelet sat in his passenger seat, sealed in plastic, evidence of something he didn't fully understand yet. St. Mary's had been a sprawling Gothic complex on the edge of the city, built in 1923 to house West Virginia's mentally unwell. By the 1990s, it had become a dumping ground for patients no one wanted to claim: the homeless, the addicted, the inconvenient. When Torres arrived, all that remained was a blackened skeleton of brick and twisted metal. The fire had been ruled accidental, faulty wiring in the East Wing. But the East Wing was where they'd kept the long-term patients, the ones with no families, no visitors. 17 patients died in the fire. Official records listed 16 names. The 17th was marked Jane Doe, no records available. Torres felt his chest tight. He called the county coroner's office. They had no Jane Doe from 1999, no unclaimed body, no autopsy report. He found a former nurse who'd worked at St. Mary's, a woman named Carol Dupree, now retired and living in a small apartment in Beckley. She agreed to meet him at a coffee shop. Her hands trembled when she stirred her tea. "You're asking about the fire," she said. It wasn't a question. Torres showed her the hospital bracelet. Carol's face went pale. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse, a photocopy of a patient intake form. "I kept this because I knew someone would come asking eventually. They told us to destroy all her records after the fire." The intake form listed Emma Harlan, age 18, admitted October 14, 1996. Diagnosis: acute dissociative disorder with paranoid features. Admitted by Dr. Leonard Voss. Reason: patient exhibits delusional belief she is being monitored by deceased family members. Danger to self. But Carol leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Emma wasn't delusional, she was right. Carol explained that Emma had been brought in by two men in suits, not police, not paramedics. They'd paid cash for her admission and requested she be kept in isolation. No phone calls, no visitors, no mail. Dr. Voss had been instructed to medicate her heavily. He didn't want her talking to anyone, Carol said. But I was on night shift. I'd check on her, and she'd tell me things. Tors leaned closer. What kind of things? Carol's eyes filled with tears. She said her mother had told her the truth before she died, that the Harlan family wasn't gone, that there were others, hidden, scattered across West Virginia, living under different names, still breeding within the bloodline because they believed it made them pure. She said she had a sister, a twin, and that her sister had been taken at birth and raised by another branch of the family. If the truth makes you sound insane, does that make the lie more powerful than reality? This is the terrifying intersection of psychiatric abuse and systemic cover-ups. It mirrors cases like Rosemary Kennedy, lobotomized and institutionalized to protect her family's reputation, or Britney Spears' conservatorship, where mental health systems were weaponized to control someone inconvenient, or the Soviet Union's political dissidents, labeled schizophrenic and imprisoned in asylums for challenging authority. When the powerful want you silent, they don't need to kill you. They just need to make sure no one believes you. Tors asked the critical question. Was Emma in the East Wing when the fire started? Carol nodded slowly. She was in room 217. I checked the night before. She was awake, sitting on her bed, staring at the wall. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "She's coming for me. I can feel her getting closer." Carol paused, her voice cracking. The fire started at 2:47 a.m. Emma's room was the point of origin, but Emma didn't smoke. She wasn't allowed matches. And her door had been locked from the outside. 17 died. One had no name. Tors asked the question he'd been dreading. Did they ever find Emma's body? Carol shook her head. No, they found remains in 16 rooms. Room 217 was completely incinerated, nothing left but ash and melted bed springs. But here's what I never told anyone. She pulled out a second piece of paper. It was a security log from the night of the fire. This shows every door access in the building. Room 217's door was unlocked at 2:22 a.m., 25 minutes before the fire started. Tors stared at the log. Someone let her out. Carol's voice was barely audible. Or someone came in. She pointed to another line. The East Wing exit was opened at 2:31 a.m. by a keycard that didn't belong to any staff member. Whoever used it triggered the alarm, but the fire started before security could respond. By the time firefighters arrived, the exit door was found propped open, like someone had left in a hurry. Tors felt the air leave his lungs. You think Emma escaped? Carol looked him dead in the eyes. I think Emma was taken, and I think whoever took her set the fire to destroy any proof she was ever there. 2 days after Tors left Carol's apartment, she was found dead in her home. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Accidental. The photocopy she'd given him was missing from his apartment when he returned. But Tors had already scanned it and emailed it to himself. Tors found Emma's twin in a birth record that listed her as stillborn, but her footprints were taken 3 days after she died. The scanned intake form became Tors' obsession. He printed it, pinned it to his wall, circled every detail. Emma's birth date, March 14, 1978. Birthplace, Mercy General Hospital, Huntington, West Virginia. Parents, Catherine Brennan and Daniel Marsh. But something gnawed at him. Emma had told the nurse she had a twin. Tors had dismissed it as part of her paranoia. Now he wasn't sure. He drove to Huntington and requested birth records from March 1978. The clerk handed him a file with 2 certificates inside. The first was Emma's standard, complete, nothing unusual. The second listed baby girl Marsh, stillborn March 14, 1978, 11:47 p.m. But attached to the stillborn certificate was a hospital notation. Footprints taken March 17, 1978, patient transferred to state care. Stillborn bobbies don't get footprints 3 days after death, and they certainly don't get transferred anywhere. Torres felt the familiar ice crawl up his spine. He'd learned to recognize the pattern now, the deliberate inconsistencies, the paperwork that almost made sense until you looked closer. Someone had declared the twin dead to erase her from the public record, but the hospital had kept her alive. The question was, why, and where had she gone? Torres found a 1978 ledger from West Virginia's Department of Health and Human Services listing special medical placements. Children with severe disabilities or genetic conditions placed in long-term care facilities. Entry 247. Female infant. DOB 3-1478. Genetic abnormalities, placed at Highland Institute, March 20, 1978. Highland Institute. Torres had never heard of it. He searched property records, hospital registries, state facility databases. Nothing. Then he found a reference in a 1981 newspaper article about budget cuts to state mental health programs. Highland Institute was mentioned in passing as a privately funded research facility for genetic disorders in rural Pocahontas County, operating under a federal research exemption. A research facility, not a hospital, not an orphanage, research. Torres drove into the mountains. Pocahontas County was remote, dense forest and winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere. He stopped at a gas station and asked an elderly attendant if he'd heard of Highland Institute. The man's expression darkened. "You a reporter?" Torres shook his head. The man leaned closer, his breath smelling like tobacco and coffee. "That place shut down in the 80s. Federal agents came, seized everything, bulldozed the buildings. But folks round here still won't go near that land. Say you can hear crying in the woods at night. If a child is erased from every record, does she stop existing? Or does she just stop being human?" Torres found the site by following old property markers. The institute had been built into the side of a mountain, camouflaged by trees, accessible only by a narrow gravel road. The buildings were gone, but the foundation remained, concrete slabs, rusted metal framework, and a series of underground tunnels sealed with steel doors. One door had been pried open. Recently. The edges were clean, the rust scraped away. He climbed down. The tunnel was lit by dim emergency lights still somehow drawing power. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, most of them empty, drawers pulled out and dumped. But in the back, Torres found one cabinet still locked. He broke it open with a crowbar. Inside, patient files from 1978 to 1984. File 247, Jane Doe, Genetic Study, DOB 3-1478. Subject exhibits extreme genetic compression consistent with multi-generational inbreeding. Physical markers: microcephaly, scoliosis, limited verbal capacity. Cognitive function: unable to assess. Experimental treatment protocols approved. Duration: indefinite. This echoes the horrors of institutions like Willowbrook State School, where disabled children were subjected to hepatitis experiments without consent, or Fernald School in Massachusetts, where boys were fed radioactive oatmeal as part of research studies, or the Canadian Indian residential schools, where indigenous children were used as test subjects for nutrition experiments. The vulnerable are always society's laboratory, and no one is held accountable until decades later. Stillborn bobbies don't get footprints 3 days later. Torres flipped through the rest of file 247, treatment logs, medication schedules, surgical procedures. The twin had been kept alive barely for 6 years. Then the entries stopped. The final notation, dated September 1984, subject 247 removed from facility by federal authority. Transfer destination, classified. File sealed under National Security Directive. National Security, for a disabled child. Torres photographed every page. As he stood to leave, his flashlight caught something carved into the concrete wall above the filing cabinet. Fresh. Recent. The same handwriting he'd seen in the cellar room beneath the Harlan mansion. They told me she was dead, but I found her, and now we're both free. Below it a date, October 1996. Emma had been here. The same month she was committed, before the fire, she'd found her twin. Torres ran his hand over the words. His fingers came away wet. Not water, blood, still fresh enough to smear. Someone had carved this within the last 48 hours. Emma Marsh was alive, and she wasn't alone. Torres filed a Freedom of Information request for Highland Institute, and 2 days later, federal agents were waiting in his apartment. They didn't knock. Torres came home from the grocery store to find his door unlocked, his living room occupied by two men in dark suits sitting on his couch like they owned the place. The taller one stood when Torres entered, his badge already out. FBI, Special Agent Garrett Mills. His partner stayed seated, arms crossed, watching Torres with the detached interest of someone evaluating a lab specimen. "Mr. Torres," Mills said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "We need to discuss your recent inquiries." Torres set his groceries down slowly, his mind racing. He'd filed FOIA requests before for old property records, historical archives. They took weeks, sometimes months to process. These men had shown up in 48 hours. Mills pulled out a folder stamped "Classified, Do Not Duplicate" and dropped it on Torres' coffee table. Highland Institute was shut down in 1984 under a federal investigation into unauthorized human experimentation. The facility was operating under a loophole in the 1974 National Research Act. Everything associated with it is sealed under national security protocols. Torres stared at the folder. "Then why are you showing me this?" Mills leaned forward. "Because you've been asking questions that suggest you've already seen files you shouldn't have access to. We want to know where you got them." Torres' apartment had been searched. His desk drawers were slightly open. His filing cabinet lock was scratched. They'd been through everything. Mills opened the classified folder and showed Torres a photograph. A group of doctors in white coats standing in front of Highland Institute, dated 1979. One face was circled in red ink: Dr. Leonard Voss. Dr. Voss wasn't just Emma's psychiatrist at St. Mary's. He was the lead geneticist at Highland Institute. He ran the experimental program on subject 247, Emma's twin. And he's the one who had Emma committed in 1996 after she discovered what he'd done. Torres felt his stomach drop. Voss had been more than a cover-up. He'd been the architect. He'd spent 6 years experimenting on a disabled child in a secret facility, then moved into mainstream psychiatry when Highland was shut down. When Emma found her sister and started asking questions, Voss had her locked up and sedated to keep her quiet. And when that wasn't enough, he'd orchestrated the fire. Mills continued, his tone icy. Dr. Voss died in 2001. Car accident. His research files were seized by the Department of Justice. Officially, the Highland program was terminated, all subjects either released or transferred to state care, and all records destroyed. He paused, studying Tor's reaction. "But you found something we missed." something that suggests at least one subject from that program is still alive and active. If the government buries evidence of its own crimes, does justice become a national security threat? Torres chose his words carefully. I found Emma Marsh's hospital records and evidence she survived the fire at St. Mary's. If her twin was experimented on at Highland and Emma found her in 1996, where are they now? Mills exchanged a look with his partner. The silent agent finally spoke, his voice rough like gravel. That's what we're trying to figure out. Because 3 weeks ago, Dr. Voss's widow was found dead in her home, apparent suicide. But before she died, she mailed a package to the Charleston Gazette. Inside was a USB drive containing Voss's personal research notes, notes he kept separate from the official Highland files. This mirrors real cases of whistleblowers and concealed government programs, Project MK Ultra, where the CIA destroyed most records of illegal drug experiments, but a cache of financial documents survived. Or the Tuskegee files, hidden for decades until a whistleblower leaked them to the press. Or Edgewood Arsenal, where soldiers were exposed to chemical agents, and the government denied it for 40 years. The truth doesn't stay buried. It waits for someone brave or desperate enough to dig it up. Mills slid a printout across the table. It was a page from Voss's notes, dated 1996. Subject 247 has demonstrated unexpected adaptive evolution. Despite severe physical limitations, cognitive function has developed beyond baseline predictions. Speech capability emerging. Subject appears to recognize sibling, subject 37B, civilian name, Emma Marsh, and exhibits distress when separated. Recommendation: terminate study. Risk of exposure too high. Her psychiatrist ran the experiments on her twin. Torres pointed to the line about terminating the study. Did they kill her? Mills shook his head. We don't know. Highland's termination logs are incomplete. Subject 247 was listed as transferred in September 1984, but there's no destination facility, no follow-up records. She vanished into the federal system. He pulled out another document, an incident report from October 1996. But we do know this. 3 days before Emma was committed to St. Mary's, a silent alarm was triggered at a federal storage facility in Elkins, West Virginia. Security footage shows two figures breaking in. One matches Emma's description. The other. Mills showed Torres a grainy security screenshot. Two people backs to the camera, one supporting the other who moved with a severe limp, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The timestamp: October 11, 1996, 2:34 a.m. The facility stored classified medical equipment and sealed research files from decommissioned programs. After the break-in, one file was missing. Subject 247's complete medical history, including her current location. Mills leaned back. Emma found her twin. She broke her out, and now they're both in the wind. Torres asked the question that had been clawing at his throat. What do you want from me? The silent agent finally smiled. It wasn't comforting. We want you to find them, because if you can, so can the others. What others? Torres whispered. Mills closed the folder. The ones who have been funding the Bloodline for the last 100 years. The ones who want it to continue. And then both agents stood up and walked out, leaving the classified folder on Torres' table, with his fingerprints all over it. Torres found a wire transfer receipt in the classified folder, $2.3 million, sent to Highland Institute in 1982 from an account registered to the Harlan Foundation. The FBI had left him bait. Torres knew it. The folder wasn't evidence, it was an invitation, or a test. He photographed every page before they could come back for it, then spent the next week tracing the money. The Harlan Foundation didn't exist in any public registry. No tax filings. No corporate records. But the bank routing number led him to a private wealth management firm in Pittsburgh that specialized in legacy family trusts. When Torres called, pretending to be a genealogist researching the Harlan family, the receptionist hesitated before saying, "I'll transfer you to Mr. Carlyle." Richard Carlyle was 73 years old, a third-generation trustee who'd managed the Harlan estate since 1975. He agreed to meet Torres at his office, a decision that felt too easy, too convenient. The office was oak-paneled and lined with leather-bound books, the kind of old money that whispered rather than shouted. Carlyle sat behind a massive desk, hands folded, expression unreadable. "You're the photographer," he said, "not a question. The one asking about Highland Institute." Torres felt sweat bead on his neck despite the air conditioning. "How did you know?" Carlyle smiled faintly. "Because the Foundation has been monitoring inquiries into the Harlan bloodline since 1984. When Highland was shut down, certain interested parties wanted to ensure the research wasn't lost. They've been waiting for someone to connect the pieces." He leaned forward. "Congratulations, Mr. Torres. You're the first in 20 years. The Harlan Foundation wasn't created by Samuel Harlan. It was created in 1921 by a consortium of East Coast families, old money, industrial wealth, who believed controlled inbreeding could preserve genetic superiority. Samuel was one of 12 founding members. The others are still active." Torres felt his mouth go dry. "Still active? You mean still alive?" Carlyle shook his head. "I mean their descendants, their children, their grandchildren. They've adapted the philosophy. Less crude than Samuel's methods, more scientific. They fund genetic research under the guise of medical foundations. They bankroll private fertility clinics. They've moved beyond direct family interbreeding into what they call genetic curation, identifying and pairing individuals with desirable bloodlines through arranged marriages, sperm donation, surrogacy. This is the modern face of eugenics, dressed in wealth and legitimacy. It mirrors groups like the Quiverful movement, where ideology justifies selective breeding, or California's forced sterilization programs that ran until 2010, or the sperm bank for Nobel Prize winners created in the 1980s. The powerful have always believed they should decide who deserves to exist. They've just learned to make it look voluntary. Carlyle pulled out a leather portfolio. Inside, photographs, dozens of families all connected by blood, names Torres recognized, senators, CEOs, federal judges, and at the center, a family tree spanning back to 1897 with the Harlan name at the root and branches extending into present day. Emma's name was there. So was her twins, listed as Subject 247, status unknown. If the wealthy believe they're genetically superior, how long before they stop pretending everyone else matters? Torres stared at the tree. "Why are you showing me this?" Carlyle's expression darkened. "Because I'm dying, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe less, and I'm tired of lying for people who think bloodlines make them gods." He tapped Emma's name. "This girl destroyed 40 years of careful planning. She found her sister. She exposed Voss. She survived a fire meant to erase her. And now she's out there somewhere, with proof that the Foundation's entire philosophy is built on genetic collapse, not superiority." Carlyle slid a USB drive across the desk. "This contains every transaction, every name, every family connected to the Foundation since 1921. Bank records, property holdings, birth records they've falsified, death certificates they've forged. If you release this, you'll destroy some of the most powerful families in America. He paused. But you'll also make yourself a target. They've killed to protect this secret. They'll kill again. Senators, CEOs, judges, all connected. Torres took the drive. His hands shook. Why me? Carlyle coughed, the sound wet and painful. Because you found what everyone else missed, the twin, the evidence that their superior genetics produce monsters. Emma is living proof that the bloodline doesn't create perfection, it creates collapse, and her sister, he trailed off, eyes distant. Subject 247 survived 6 years of experimental torture and learned to speak. She's not defective, she's adaptive. That terrifies them. Torres stood to leave. Carlyle called after him. One more thing. The Foundation meets once a year. Next gathering is in 3 weeks. Charleston, West Virginia, private estate. If you want to expose them, that's your moment. He wrote an address on a card and handed it to Torres. But be careful. Emma will be there too. Torres froze. How do you know? Carlyle's smile was grim. Because she's been sending them messages. Photos of documents they thought were destroyed. Location pings from cities where Foundation members live. She's taunting them. She wants them to gather in one place. Torres looked at the address. It was the site of the old Harlan mansion. The one that had been bulldozed in 1997. But someone had been making wire transfers to a construction company for the last 6 months. They were rebuilding it. The construction permits for the Harlan mansion were filed under a shell company owned by a dead woman, Emma's mother, Catherine Brennan. Torres spent 2 days verifying Carlyle's information before he trusted it. The USB drive was legitimate, decades of financial records, encrypted correspondence, digitized family trees with annotations like successful pairing and genetic deviation noted. But the construction permits haunted him. Catherine Brennan had died in 1979. Yet in 2023, her name appeared on building permits, contractor agreements, and a $4.2 million land purchase for the exact plot where the Harlan estate once stood. The signature on every document was identical to Catherine's signature from her 1977 marriage license, not forged, but perfect. As if the same hand had signed both, 46 years apart. Torres drove back to West Virginia. The October air was sharp with the smell of rotting leaves and coming snow. The road to the estate was newly paved, the trees along the access route trimmed back. Someone had spent serious money making this place accessible again. As he rounded the final curve, his breath caught. The mansion WAS Chinese letter and EARLY complete. Not a reconstruction, an exact replica. Same Gothic architecture, same stone facade, same iron gate entrance. But the windows were wrong. They were one-way glass, dark and reflective, the kind used in interrogation rooms and surveillance facilities. He parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot through the woods. The construction crew was gone, but fresh tire tracks suggested they'd been there recently. Security cameras dotted the perimeter, small, professional grade, the kind that transmitted to remote servers. Torres circled the property, staying low, until he found what he was looking for. A service entrance on the east side, partially concealed by scaffolding. The door was unlocked. Inside the mansion was a perfect recreation of the original, same floor plan, same furnishings, even the same portraits lining the walls. But these weren't copies. They were the originals, the ones Torres had photographed in the cellar in 1994. Someone had recovered them, preserved them, reinstalled them like holy relics. The air inside tasted metallic and cold. Torres moved through the entry hall, his footsteps echoing on marble tile. The house was lit by motion sensor lights that flickered on as he passed, creating the disorienting effect of walking through a museum after hours. He found the dining room, a massive table set for 12 crystal glasses positioned with mathematical precision, name cards at each seat. Tours photographed them. Names he recognized from Carlyle's files. Whitmore Danforth, Voss Leonard's son, Pemberton Harlan. Wait Harlan, Tours leaned closer. The card read, E. Harlan, guest of honor. When victims become the architects of their own revenge, does justice become indistinguishable from obsession? Tours climbed the central staircase. The second floor was lined with bedrooms, each one staged like a museum exhibit of a specific decade, 1920s, 1940s, 1960s, 1980s. Each room contained period-appropriate clothing, personal items, and framed photographs of Harlan family members from that era. It was a shrine, a temple to a bloodline that should have died out decades ago. But in the final room, the staging changed. This room was modern, current, and it was lived in. Clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, a laptop on the desk still warm to the touch. Torres opened the laptop. No password. The screen displayed a single document. Attendee Manifest Foundation Annual Gathering, October 28, 2024. 12 names, 12 families, and a note at the bottom, all confirmed. Security protocols waived per EH request. No external personnel. This was a trap. Emma hadn't just infiltrated the foundation. She'd lured them here, convinced them to gather in a place where she controlled every variable, every exit, every camera. Torres felt admiration and horror in equal measure. This mirrored tactics from real-life revenge plots like the Lavender Hill mob, where victims of financial crimes orchestrated elaborate stings, or the Jewish resistance groups post-WWII who hunted Nazis by posing as allies. When the system offers no justice, people create their own. Permits filed by a woman dead for 45 years. Torres heard footsteps on the floor below, multiple people, voices. He closed the laptop and moved to the bedroom door, peering through the crack. 3 figures entered the foyer, 2 men in expensive suits and a woman in a wheelchair, her posture twisted, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. One of the men checked his watch. We're early. Meeting isn't until 8. The woman made a sound, not quite speech, more like fragments of words strung together with effort. The second man leaned closer to her, nodding as if he understood. She says the others are already here, waiting in the cellar. Tor's blood ran cold. There was no cellar. The original had been sealed when the mansion was demolished, unless they'd rebuilt that too. The woman in the wheelchair turned her head, slowly, unnaturally, and looked directly at the door where Torres was hiding. Her eyes, narrow-set, pale, almost colorless, locked onto his. She smiled. Her mouth moved, forming words that came out garbled but unmistakable. Found you. Torres bolted. He ran down the hallway, searching for a back staircase, a servant's passage, anything. Behind him, he heard the wheelchair's electric motor humming, impossibly fast, impossibly close. He found a door marked staff only and threw it open. A staircase descended into darkness. He had no choice. He went down. The door at the bottom was marked with a copper plate. Subject observation room, authorized personnel only. And it was unlocked, because someone wanted him to go inside. The cellar had been rebuilt with one addition: live video feeds from every room in the mansion, all streaming to a single monitor wall. Torres descended into cold that felt wrong, too deep for October, too sterile for a basement. The staircase ended in a steel door that opened with a pneumatic hiss, airtight seal, climate-controlled. The space beyond was nothing like the original cellar. This was a command center. 20 monitors lined one wall, each displaying a different room in the mansion above. Tours could see the three figures from the foyer now entering the dining room, the woman in the wheelchair positioning herself at the head of the table. The monitors weren't just surveillance. Each screen had biometric overlays, heart rate, respiration, thermal imaging. Whoever designed this wasn't just watching. They were studying the Foundation members like specimens. The room smelled of antiseptic and ozone, the kind of smell that clings to operating rooms and laboratories. Tours moved closer to the monitors. 8 more people had arrived. He recognized faces from Carlisle's files. Jonathan Whitmore, heir to a pharmaceutical empire. Senator Patricia Danforth. Marcus Voss, Leonard's son, now a prominent geneticist at Johns Hopkins. They were all gathering in the dining room, filling the 12 seats. All except one. The chair marked E. Harlan remained empty. But on the monitor, Tours could see someone standing in the doorway just outside the camera's view, a shadow, unmoving, watching them. A computer terminal sat beneath the monitors, screen glowing with a spreadsheet labeled Genetic Profiles, Foundation Bloodlines 1921-2024. Tours clicked through the files. Each Foundation family had been tracked across generations, marriages, births, genetic disorders, causes of death. The data was meticulous, clinical. Every family showed the same pattern: declining fertility rates after 3 generations of curated breeding, increased rates of autoimmune disorders, cognitive impairment in 40% of 4th-generation offspring, and a notation that appeared repeatedly: genetic collapse imminent without external introduction. At the bottom of the file was a video dated October 15, 2024, 3 days ago. Tours clicked play. The video showed the woman in the wheelchair, Emma's twin, subject 247, sitting in this same room, speaking directly to the camera. Her voice was strained, each word requiring visible effort, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, burning with purpose. "My name is Sarah, not subject 247. Sarah," she paused, struggling with the next words. "They took me, studied me because I was broken, but I learned, I watched, I remembered." Her twisted hand reached toward the camera, finger pointing at something off-screen. "Emma found me, freed me, taught me everything about them, about what they did to us, to hundreds of others." Sarah's expression hardened. "They think they're gods, superior, but look." She held up a medical file, pressed it to the camera. Tours recognized it, subject 247's genetic analysis from Highland Institute. "Their blood is poison, collapsing, dying, and they know it, but they won't stop, won't admit. They're creating monsters." If the pursuit of perfection only creates suffering, does the pursuit itself become the disease? Sarah leaned closer to the camera, her breathing labored. "Tonight, they come here, think it's a meeting, a celebration, but Emma and I, we're showing them what they really are, what they've become." She smiled, a fractured, unsettling expression. "We're giving them what they wanted: purity, perfection, just not the way they imagined." The video ended. Tours felt ice in his veins. He looked back at the monitors. The Foundation members were seated now, wine being poured, conversation flowing. They looked comfortable, confident, completely unaware. And then Tours noticed something that made his stomach drop. The dining room door had closed, locked. He could see Marcus Voss trying the handle, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. This was the dark evolution of historical justice, victims turning perpetrators' methods against them. Like the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi doctors faced medical testimony about their own experiments. Or the Bhopal disaster, where corporate negligence became corporate accountability through exposure. Or even Me Too, where the powerful were judged by the systems they'd abused. But Emma and Sarah weren't waiting for courts. They'd built their own. Biometric overlays, they weren't watching, they were studying them. Torres heard a sound behind him, the pneumatic door sealing shut. He spun around. Emma stood in the doorway he'd entered through, now on his side of the seal. She looked older than her 46 years, her face lined with exhaustion and something harder, purpose distilled into obsession. The widow's peak. The narrow-set eyes, unmistakable. She held a tablet in one hand, remote control in the other. "Mr. Torres," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I was hoping you'd figure it out. You're smarter than the others who tried." She gestured to the monitors. "They're wondering why the doors won't open, why their phones don't work, why the windows won't break." She pressed a button on the tablet. The monitors switched views. Now Torres could see inside the walls gas canisters, wiring, ventilation systems that had been modified. "It's not what you think," Emma said quickly. "I'm not going to kill them." Tor's voice came out hoarse. "Then what is this?" Emma's smile was grim. "I'm going to show them what genetic collapse really looks like. What happens when you breed for purity until there's nothing left but degradation." She pressed another button. On the monitors, a section of wall in the dining room slid open. From the darkness beyond, figures began to emerge. Humanoid. Moving strangely. Torres couldn't make out details on the grainy feed, but he saw the Foundation members recoil in horror. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Subjects 12 through 36, the ones who didn't die, the ones Highland kept alive in hidden facilities. Sarah and I spent 8 years finding them, freeing them." Torres felt reality tilting. "That's impossible. Highland was shut down 40 years ago." Emma looked directly at him, eyes bright with tears and rage. "Highland was never shut down. It was relocated, privatized, and the Foundation kept funding it." She turned back to the monitors. "Welcome to the family reunion." The figures emerging from the wall weren't monsters. They were evidence that had been kept breathing for 40 years. Torres couldn't look away from the monitors. The Foundation members had backed against the far wall of the dining room, wine glasses shattered on the floor, their cultivated composure disintegrating into raw panic. The figures moving toward them varied in age. Some appeared to be in their 50s, others much younger, 20s perhaps. But they all shared the unmistakable markers. Severe scoliosis, limbs that bent at wrong angles, faces with features compressed or elongated by generations of genetic repetition. They weren't attacking. They were simply standing there, arranged in a line, staring at the Foundation members with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked horribly like recognition. Emma's voice was steady behind Tor's, narrating like a documentarian. "Subject 12, Michael, born 1943, son of Samuel Harlan III and his own niece. He's 78 now. Highland kept him in a pharmaceutical testing program until 2003, never taught him to read, but he can recite every drug they tested on him, every side effect, every dose." She pressed a button. The audio from the dining room crackled to life. Michael was speaking, his voice slurred but determined. "Chlorpromazine, 50 milligrams daily, for 12 years made me shake, made me forget." Torres gripped the edge of the console. "Emma, this is," she cut him off. "Justice, cruelty, what would you call it, Mr. Torres?" Her voice hardened. "They're not hurt, not drugged, not restrained. They're just present, meeting the family they paid to torture." Sarah wheeled into view on the monitors, entering the dining room through another door. She positioned herself between her siblings and the Foundation members. When she spoke, the room went silent. "You don't recognize us, but we recognize you. We've seen your names on funding documents, on consent forms. You signed for procedures we never agreed to." Senator Danforth found her voice first, diplomatic training overriding fear. This is a misunderstanding. Highland was a legitimate medical facility, treatment for genetic disorders. Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. Treatment, they removed my spleen when I was 6 to see if I could survive without it. No anesthesia because subject 247 might have higher pain tolerance. Was that treatment? Marcus Voss stepped forward, hands raised. My father's research was peer-reviewed, approved by. Another figure moved from the line, a woman in her 40s with a face that looked like it had been reconstructed multiple times. Your father is dead, but his notes aren't. We have them, every surgery, every experiment, including the ones that weren't approved. The ones he did in the middle of the night, when no one was watching. I was subject 19. Caroline. He practiced facial reconstruction on me 7 times because he wanted perfect symmetry. When the powerful write the rules of morality, do their victims have any recourse except to rewrite them in return? Tours watched the Foundation members' faces cycle through denial, anger, and finally, in some cases, something that might have been shame, but not all of them. Jonathan Whitmore, the pharmaceutical heir, straightened his spine and spoke with ice in his voice. You're proving our point. Look at yourselves. Genetic disasters, if our research can prevent others from. He didn't get to finish. A younger man stepped forward, maybe 30, moving with a pronounced limp but with eyes that burned with intelligence. I have 3 PhDs, neuroscience, genetics, molecular biology, earned them all, while you people were still collecting dividends from the drugs tested on us. This was the ultimate refutation. Survivors who not only lived but thrived despite everything done to them. It mirrors the reality of historical atrocities. Concentration camp survivors who became artists and scholars, Tuskegee victims who lived long enough to receive presidential apologies, thalidomide survivors who became disability rights advocates. Trauma doesn't define capability, and suffering doesn't validate the systems that cause it. Subject 12 can recite every drug, every dose, 78 years. Emma turned to Tors, her expression unreadable. I need you to record this, every word, every face, because when this is over, they'll deny it. They'll claim we kidnapped them, manipulated them, fabricated evidence. She handed him a camera. But if an independent witness documents it, someone who stumbled into this by accident, then it becomes undeniable. Tors hesitated. What happens after? You can't keep them here forever. Emma's smile was cold. I don't need forever, just until morning. The USB drive Richard Carlisle gave you. I made sure it would be delivered to 3 federal prosecutors and 5 major newspapers at 8 a.m. tomorrow, but only if I send the release code. If anything happens to me or my siblings tonight, the files go nowhere. But if we all walk out of here at dawn. She let the implication hang. On the monitors, Sarah was still speaking to the Foundation members. You have a choice. You can acknowledge what was done, publicly use your money, your influence, to create a victims fund, medical care, reparations, real accountability, or, she gestured to the camera Tors now realized was mounted in the corner of the dining room. The world sees this, sees you, sees what you've been, funding, and decides. Tors raised the camera. He had no choice, but as he pressed record, the lights flickered, all of them. The monitors went dark for 3 seconds. When they came back, there was a 13th person in the dining room. Someone who hadn't come from the hidden door. Someone who'd been standing behind the Foundation members the entire time, just outside the camera's view. Emma saw it too. Her face went white. No, that's impossible. The figure on the screen turned toward the camera. Tors saw the face clearly now. It was Samuel Harlan III, or someone who looked exactly like him, down to the widow's peak. The narrow-set eyes, the same face from the 1930s portraits. But Samuel Harlan died in 1965. Except the figure was wearing modern clothes and holding a cell phone. The man who looked like Samuel Harlan I spoke with a voice Tors had heard before, on the phone, giving construction permits, arranging foundation meetings. Emma's hands were shaking. She grabbed the tablet, fingers flying across the screen, pulling up files, photographs, death certificates. Samuel Harlan I died February 18, 1965. Heart failure. I have his death certificate, his grave site. The man on the monitor turned fully toward the camera and smiled. It was Samuel's smile captured in a dozen family portraits, but the eyes were different, sharper, more aware. My name is Samuel Harlan VI, he said, his voice carrying the faint Appalachian accent of old money and older secrets. And I'm not a ghost, I'm the continuation. Tors felt his reality fracturing. Sixth, that would mean, Emma finished his thought, her voice hollow, 4 more generations, after the one we knew about, after Emma, after me. She looked at Sarah on the monitor. Sarah's expression had shifted from triumph to horror. She knew. Somehow she'd known this was possible but hoped she was wrong. Samuel VI moved through the dining room with practiced ease, ignoring the foundation members pressed against the wall, walking past the survivors standing in their line. He approached Sarah's wheelchair and crouched down to her eye level. Hello, Aunt Sarah. You were subject 247. I was subject 52. We're family, closer family than you realize. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Tors couldn't see the image clearly on the monitor, but he saw Sarah's reaction. She recoiled, her twisted body jerking in the chair. Samuel VI stood and addressed the room, his voice amplified somehow, echoing. The Foundation thought Highland ended. It didn't. It evolved, moved offshore. The Cayman Islands, then Singapore. Currently, it operates as 3 private medical research facilities in international waters, and I've been running them since 2015. He turned to face the hidden camera directly, as if he could see through it, to Emma and Tors watching below. Emma, you thought you were exposing us. You thought gathering the Foundation here would end it, but you've done something far more valuable. He gestured to the survivors. You've assembled the most comprehensive living dataset of multi-generational inbreeding outcomes in human history. 24 subjects, 40 to 80 years of genetic data. Do you have any idea what that's worth? Tors saw Emma's face cycle through emotions too fast to track: confusion, rage, realization, then something close to despair. Samuel VI continued. Highland wasn't about studying genetic collapse. It was about understanding it, mapping it, so we could do what Samuel I never imagined. He pulled out a small vial from his pocket, held it up to the light. We can fix it. Gene therapy, CRISPR modifications. We've been testing it for 5 years on subjects born into the program. The collapse can be reversed. The bloodline can be purified without the unfortunate side effects. If science can erase the consequences of cruelty, does that make the cruelty justified in retrospect? Senator Danforth found her voice, diplomatic training reasserting itself. You're talking about human genetic modification. That's illegal in every— Samuel VI laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine amusement. Illegal where? In countries that enforce laws. We're not in those countries, Senator. And the people we're modifying, they don't legally exist. No birth certificates, no social security numbers, born in international waters, raised in private facilities. He looked directly at Marcus Voss. Your father's research was crude but foundational. You've continued it, haven't you, Dr. Voss, through your fertility clinic in Baltimore? Marcus went pale. Torres saw it on the monitor. The others turned to look at him. Jonathan Whitmore spoke, his voice tight. "Marcus, what is he talking about?" Samuel VI answered for him. "Dr. Voss runs one of 17 fertility clinics worldwide that participate in the program. Prospective parents think they're getting screened donors. What they're actually getting are genetically modified embryos. We've introduced Harlan bloodline genetics into approximately 2,400 births over the last decade. This was eugenics evolved, no longer forced sterilization or selective breeding, but direct genetic manipulation hidden in legitimate medical procedures. It mirrors real concerns about China's He Jiankui, who created gene-edited bobbies in 2018, or 23andMe data being sold to pharmaceutical companies, or designer baby clinics that already exist in legal gray areas. The technology exists. The ethics haven't caught up, and the wealthy don't wait for permission. 2,400 births, gene-edited, they don't know. Emma was pulling up files frantically, searching for something. "This isn't possible. Carlisle gave me everything, every family, every connection. There's no Samuel VI in any." Samuel's voice crackled through the speakers in the observation room. He wasn't just on the monitors anymore. He was broadcasting down to them. Richard Carlisle was a good man, dying with a conscience. But he didn't know everything, Emma, because he wasn't foundation. He was middle management. The real decisions were made by people he never met. The monitors all switched to the same image simultaneously, a family tree. But this one was different from Carlisle's files. It extended past Emma, past 1996, branching into dozens of names Torres didn't recognize. And at the center, connecting them all, Samuel Harlan VI, born 1988, parents. Subject 37, Catherine Brennan, and Subject 41, Marcus Harlan, Samuel IV's son. Torres did the math. If Catherine was Subject 37 and she gave birth to Emma in 1978 and then to Samuel VI in 1988. "Emma," Torres whispered, "you have a brother." Emma's face crumpled. "No, no, my mother died in 1979. I was 1 year old, I don't have." Samuel VI's voice cut through. "She didn't die, Emma. She was relocated, again, given a new name, married to her cousin Marcus under supervised conditions, and she had me, raised me in the program, told me everything, about you, about Sarah, about what we were designed to be." On the monitor, Samuel VI pulled out a second vial. This one was filled with a dark red liquid. "This is mother's blood, taken the day she actually died. 2019, pancreatic cancer, same thing that killed Samuel III, genetic, inevitable, but not for me." He held up his arm, rolled back his sleeve. "I've been gene-modified since birth. Every marker for genetic collapse deleted, rewritten, perfected." He looked directly at the camera. "And now I'm going to offer the same choice to everyone in this room. Join the program willingly. Let us study you. Let us fix you. Or—" The lights in the observation room went out completely. Torres heard Emma scream. Then the sound of a door opening. Then footsteps, multiple sets, coming down the stairs. And Samuel VI's voice, now directly behind them in the darkness. "Or become specimens again." When the lights came back on, Emma was gone, and Torres was surrounded by people who shared her face. Torres blinked against the sudden fluorescent glare. 5 figures stood in a semicircle around him, all with the unmistakable Harlan features, the widow's peak, the narrow-set eyes, the distinctive jawline. But their ages varied wildly. A woman who looked 60, a man who couldn't be older than 25, 2 teenagers, and Samuel VI standing in the center holding a tablet like a conductor with a baton. Meet subjects 48, 53, 61, 64, and 67. "My half-siblings. We all share the same mother, Catherine Brennan, different fathers, all from the Harlan bloodline. She had 8 children total before the cancer killed her. Emma and Sarah are the oldest. I'm in the middle. These 4 are the youngest. Tor's camera was still recording. He raised it instinctively, documenting because that's what he'd been asked to do, but his hands were shaking. "Where's Emma?" Samuel VI tilted his head, the gesture eerily similar to Sarah's fractured movements. "She ran upstairs looking for exits, but there aren't any. Not yet. This building is sealed until 8 a.m., just like she designed it. The irony is beautiful, don't you think?" On the monitors behind them, Tors could see the dining room. The Foundation members were arguing among themselves now, accusations flying. Marcus Voss was backed into a corner, Jonathan Whitmore shouting in his face. The survivors, Emma's siblings, stood in a line, watching silently. Sarah had wheeled herself to the locked door, trying the handle repeatedly with her twisted hand. Samuel VI activated the tablet. The dining room monitor switched to split screen. New footage appeared, security cameras from locations tours didn't recognize. Sterile white rooms, medical equipment, and people, dozens of people, children, teenagers, adults, all bearing the same genetic markers, all in identical hospital gowns. Highland Facility 7, Singapore, operational since 2009. Currently housing 187 subjects, ages 3 to 42. Tors felt bile rise. "You're still creating them, still breeding," Samuel VI cut him off sharply. "No, we stopped uncontrolled breeding in 1995. These subjects are the result of controlled genetic trials, embryos modified in vitro, gestated by surrogates who are well compensated and medically supervised, born into an environment designed for their specific needs. This isn't the cruelty of Samuel III's era. This is science." One of the teenagers spoke, a girl with auburn hair and features slightly less compressed than the others. "I was born in the program, so was my sister." She gestured to the other teenager. "We're healthy, we can walk, we can think, we're not like." She trailed off, glancing at the monitors showing Sarah and the others. Samuel VI's expression softened slightly. "Subject 64 is correct. The modifications work. Each generation is more stable. In 3 more iterations, the genetic collapse will be completely eliminated. We'll have preserved the Harlan bloodline without the degradation." If you erase all the suffering, does that retroactively justify the experiments that caused it? Tors lowered the camera. "This is still eugenics. You're creating people to fulfill a genetic ideal. That's—" The older woman, subject 48, spoke for the first time, her voice weary. "That's what every parent does when they choose genetic screening, when they select embryos without disabilities, when they use sperm donors based on height and intelligence. We're just honest about it." The logic was seductive and horrifying. It mirrored contemporary debates about genetic screening for Down syndrome, where 67% of pregnancies are terminated after diagnosis, or Iceland's near elimination of Down syndrome birth through prenatal testing, or the controversy around CRISPR bobbies, where parents wanted to edit out HIV susceptibility. Society already practices selection. The Harlan program just industrialized it and removed consent. 8 children, same mother, different Harlan fathers. Samuel VI's tablet chimed. He glanced at it, then smiled. "Emma's in the chapel, 3rd floor. She found something I left for her." He switched the monitor feed. The chapel was a small room with stained glass windows and rows of wooden pews. Emma stood at the altar, staring at something Tors couldn't see. Samuel VI zoomed the camera. It was a photograph, a family portrait from 1988. Catherine Brennan, heavily pregnant, sitting beside a man Tors recognized from the archives, Marcus Harlan, Samuel IV's son. And standing next to them, a young Emma, 10 years old, smiling. Emma's voice crackled through the speakers, speaking to no one or to herself. I remember this. I remember him. I thought he was an uncle. He'd visit sometimes. Bring gifts. Tell mother she was special. Her voice broke. I didn't know she'd had more children, that she'd stayed with them, that she'd... Samuel VI spoke into his tablet, transmitting to the chapel speakers. She loved us, Emma, all of us. She tried to protect you by keeping you separate, but she couldn't leave the program. They owned her, genetically, legally. She was subject 37 until the day she died. Torres watched Emma collapse into a pew, shoulders shaking. He documented atrocities, photographed the aftermath of violence, witnessed human suffering in dozens of forms, but this felt different. This was cruelty disguised as inevitability. Samuel VI turned to Torres. You're wondering why I'm showing you all this, why I'm confessing. He gestured to the camera. Because confession requires witnesses, and by dawn you'll understand why this continues, why it has to continue. She tried to protect you, but they owned her, genetically. Samuel VI pressed another button. The monitors switched again. This time Torres saw outside the mansion headlights, multiple vehicles pulling up the access road, black SUVs, unmarked. The FBI doesn't know about this location, Mr. Torres, but my associates do. They'll arrive in approximately 12 minutes. They'll secure the building, and then everyone here will be given a choice. He looked at Torres directly. Join the program as a documented researcher. Help us refine the modifications. Make them safer, more ethical, or... Subject 48 finished his sentence. Or leave with your footage and become a conspiracy theorist no one will believe. Because we own the foundation members in that dining room. We own 17 fertility clinics. We own medical boards and research committees. We own the narrative. Torres heard the pneumatic door behind him hiss open. He turned. Sarah had somehow made it downstairs, her wheelchair's motor whirring. Her face was twisted with effort, but her eyes were clear. He's lying, she gasped. The vehicles aren't his, they're ours. Emma called them before she ran. Federal marshals, real ones. Samuel VI's expression didn't change, but Torres saw his jaw tighten. Sarah, always the optimist, but you called them 2 hours ago. We intercepted the call, rerouted it. He showed her his tablet. Call logs, Federal Marshal Service number, redirected to a private security firm. The people coming are mine. Sarah smiled through tears. I called them 5 hours ago, before we even arrived. The call you intercepted was the decoy. Outside, Torres heard sirens, multiple vehicles, and the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. Samuel VI's tablet slipped from his hand. Impossible, you couldn't have. Sarah's voice was triumphant. Subject 247 was studied for 6 years. You think I didn't learn how you people operate? The observation room door burst open. Federal agents, real ones, badges and weapons, but Torres saw Samuel VI smile. Because on the monitors the dining room's hidden wall was opening again, and from the darkness beyond more figures were emerging, not survivors, not subjects, guards, armed, professional. Phase 2, Samuel VI whispered. The federal agents had warrants, but the Foundation had private military contractors who didn't care about warrants. The observation room erupted into chaos. Federal agents shouted commands, ordering everyone to the ground. Samuel VI raised his hand slowly, deliberately, his expression unnervingly calm. The 4 younger Harlan siblings dropped immediately, practiced and coordinated like they'd rehearsed this scenario. But Torres saw what the agents didn't on the monitors behind them. 8 armed guards in tactical gear were taking positions in the dining room, weapons trained on the survivors and Foundation members alike. The lead federal agent, a woman in her 40s with Marshal Service credentials, looked at the monitors and froze. "Command, we have armed hostiles inside. Multiple civilians at risk. Requesting backup and SWAT deployment." Samuel VI spoke clearly, voice projected for everyone to hear. "Those guards answer to private security contracted through Sovereign Solutions International, legally operating under provisions of the International Security Services Act. They're not violating any U.S. laws because this property is technically owned by a Cayman Islands trust, making it," the marshal cut him off, "making it U.S. soil with a foreign legal shell. We know the loophole, Mr. Harlan. We've been tracking your operation for 8 months." Torres felt a flicker of hope. 8 months. They'd been investigating. This wasn't random, but Sarah's expression told him something else. She was staring at the monitors, counting. "Not enough," she whispered. Emma said, 12 guards minimum. There's only 8. On the monitors, the dining room door burst open from the outside. Emma charged in, followed by 4 more people Torres didn't recognize, but they moved like law enforcement, weapons drawn, coordinated. Emma wasn't running. She'd been gathering reinforcements. The 8 guards in the dining room spun toward the new threat, confusion breaking their formation. The marshal in the observation room received a radio transmission. Her expression shifted from authoritative control to barely contained shock. "That's Emma Marsh. She's not law enforcement. She's—" Samuel VI finished her sentence, his calm finally cracking into something sharper. "She's FBI witness protection. Has been since 1999. After the hospital fire, the Bureau relocated her, gave her a new identity. Used her knowledge of the program to build a case they couldn't move forward on because every attempt to gather evidence was blocked by classified national security designations." Tor's mind reeled. Emma hadn't just survived. She'd been working with federal authorities for 25 years, trying to expose the program from the inside. The marshal nodded slowly. "Emma Marsh is our primary CI on Operation Bloodline, a joint task force between FBI, Marshals Service, and the Department of Health investigating illegal genetic experimentation and human trafficking. She's been feeding us information on Highland's offshore operations since 2015. This gathering was her idea, get everyone in one place, on U.S. soil where we have jurisdiction. When justice requires becoming as calculating as your oppressors, do you risk becoming what you're fighting against?" On the monitors, the standoff in the dining room was deteriorating. The guards had backed the Foundation members and survivors into a corner, using them as human shields. Emma and her team held position at the door, weapons raised but not firing. Marcus Voss was shouting something, hands up, trying to negotiate. Then Sarah spoke into her tablet, her voice transmitted to the dining room speakers. "Sovereign Solutions. Contract number 2847. B signed 2019. Clause 17. Stand down protocol when federal jurisdiction is established. You're required, by contract, to surrender." One of the guards lowered his weapon slightly, speaking into his comm unit. Samuel VI cursed under his breath. "She memorized the security contracts. Of course she did." Subject 48, the older woman, actually laughed, the sound bitter and proud. "You studied us for 40 years. You think we weren't studying you?" This was the power shift, subjects becoming agents, victims weaponizing the same systems used against them. It mirrors real operations like Operation Underground Railroad, where trafficking survivors help law enforcement identify predators, or the Innocence Project, where exonerees become advocates, or Anonymous's operations against child exploitation, where victims became hackers. Pain creates expertise, and expertise, when organized, becomes justice. She's not running. She's been FBI witness protection for 25 years. The guards in the dining room lowered their weapons. Contract obligation superseded loyalty. They backed toward the exits, hands visible following protocol. But Samuel VI was already moving. He grabbed Tor's camera, yanked it from his hands, and smashed it against the console. No evidence, no testimony. The Foundation members will claim duress. The survivors have no legal existence to testify. And you, he pointed at Tors, are a photographer who broke into private property. The marshal stepped forward. We have 17 months of recorded conversations, bank records, medical files Sarah provided, testimony from 24 survivors across 4 countries, your mother's DNA preserved from her autopsy, and genetic evidence from the 2,400 births you mentioned. She pulled out an evidence bag containing the vial Samuel had shown earlier. You brought the smoking gun into federal custody yourself. Samuel VI's expression cycled through emotions too fast to read, finally settling on something like resignation mixed with defiance. You'll never convict the Foundation members. They'll claim ignorance, plausible deniability, and the offshore facilities. He smiled coldly. Singapore won't extradite. The Cayman Islands will protect the trust. You've exposed a conspiracy you can't prosecute. Sarah wheeled forward, positioning herself between Samuel and the marshal. We don't need convictions, we need exposure, Tor's footage, the files going public at 8 a.m., the world knowing what you've done. That's the real punishment. You can't hide in the dark anymore. Tors checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. 73 minutes until the USB files Carlisle gave him would be released automatically to prosecutors and newspapers, unless Emma or Sarah sent the kill code. And Tors suddenly understood why Samuel had seemed so calm. Operation Bloodline, 17 months of evidence from inside. Samuel VI pulled out his phone, not his tablet, a different device. You want exposure, fine, but exposure cuts both ways. He pressed a button. On the monitors, new footage appeared, not from the mansion but from a hospital. Recent footage, a woman in a delivery room. The timestamp, October 10, 2024, 6 days ago. The woman's face was visible. Tors recognized her from Carlisle's files. She was the daughter of Senator Patricia Danforth. Your senator's granddaughter, Samuel said quietly, born 6 days ago, via Dr. Voss's fertility clinic, genetically modified, carrier of Harlan genetic markers introduced through screened donor sperm. Senator Danforth doesn't know. Her daughter doesn't know. But when those files go public at 8 a.m., the genetic testing records will show it. The Foundation's children and grandchildren are already part of the bloodline. The marshal's face went pale. You're bluffing. Samuel VI shook his head. We've introduced modified genetics into the families of 47 federal officials, 18 judges, 12 senators, and 5 members of the current presidential cabinet over the last decade. Through fertility clinics, sperm donation, egg freezing, and surrogacy, all consensual procedures, all with falsified donor profiles. He looked directly at Sarah. You want to expose us? Fine. But you'll also expose that the American government's next generation carries our blood. Tors heard Emma's voice crackle through the radio the marshal was holding. He's not bluffing. I found the files. The births are real. We have genetic confirmation on 32 of them. The marshal looked at Tors, then at Sarah, then at the monitors showing the newborn baby girl sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. If we release those files, Samuel VI smiled. You destroy the families of people who had no idea they were part of this, or you stay silent and let the program continue. Either way, we win. Sarah's hand hovered over her tablet. the kill code that would stop the 8 a.m. release. 70 minutes, one decision. And Torres realized there was no good choice. There never had been. Sarah's finger hovered over the kill code, and then she pressed it, canceling the 8 a.m. release. The observation room went silent. Every eye turned to Sarah. The marshal took a step forward, hand raised. Wait, what did you just? Sarah's voice was steady, clearer than Torres had ever heard it. I sent the kill code. The files won't release at 8 a.m. They won't release at all. Emma's voice exploded through the radio. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? We agreed. Full exposure. That was the plan. Sarah wheeled herself to face the monitors, addressing her sister through the camera. The plan was to stop them, not to destroy. Innocent children, not to make bobbies, pay for their parents' crimes. Her twisted hand gripped the armrest of her wheelchair. I was born a crime, Emma. Subject 247, a genetic mistake, a consequence of evil, but I'm still a person. Those bobbies, they're people too, and they didn't choose this. Torres felt something break inside his chest. The moral calculus was unbearable. On one hand, exposing a conspiracy that had tortured hundreds, violated human rights for a century, and continued to operate with impunity. On the other, destroying the lives of children and families who had no knowledge they'd been manipulated. Samuel VI's smile widened. Subject 247 understands what the rest of you don't. Justice at any cost isn't justice. It's revenge wearing a righteous mask. The marshal pulled out her phone and made a call. Sir, we have a situation. The primary evidence release has been canceled by the CI, requesting guidance on prosecution without public exposure. She listened for 30 seconds, her expression hardening. Then she hung up. Department of Justice is invoking national security privilege. All evidence related to Operation Bloodline is being classified. Case suspended pending executive review. Torres felt reality tilting again. You're covering it up. After everything. The marshal cut him off, voice tight with barely controlled fury. I'm following orders. Orders that come from people who just learned their grandchildren are genetically connected to a eugenics program. You think they want this public? You think any politician wants to explain to their constituents that their family bloodline has been compromised? This was the inevitable endpoint of power protecting itself, not through violence or intimidation, but through legal mechanisms designed to look like prudence. It mirrors historical cover-ups like the CIA's destruction of torture tapes, deemed national security, or the Catholic Church's decades-long concealment of abuse, protected by institutional authority, or corporate settlements with NDAs, where money silences victims and perpetrators walk free. The system doesn't fail. It works exactly as designed to preserve itself. If the price of justice is chaos, and the price of peace is silence, which debt is too high to pay? Emma appeared in the observation room doorway, face flushed, eyes blazing. She pushed past the federal agents and stopped directly in front of Sarah's wheelchair. You gave up. After 25 years, you just gave up. Sarah met her sister's gaze without flinching. I chose 32 innocent children over revenge. That's not giving up, that's deciding what kind of person I want to be. Emma's voice broke. Those foundation members will walk free. Samuel will keep operating offshore. The program will continue. Samuel VI interrupted, his tone almost gentle. No, Emma, it won't, not the way it has been. He looked at the marshal. I'm prepared to make a deal, full cooperation, complete records of all offshore facilities, names of every participant, locations of every subject, medical files, genetic data, everything. The marshal's eyes narrowed. In exchange for immunity for the modified children and their families, they never face public exposure. Their genetic records are sealed, and I surrender myself for prosecution under sealed indictment. You get to dismantle Highland. The Foundation members face charges in closed federal proceedings. The program ends, but the children stay protected. Torres saw the calculation happening in real time. Samuel VI was offering them everything they needed to destroy the conspiracy, except the public spectacle. Justice without exposure. Accountability without humiliation. The marshal looked at her phone again, waiting for instructions from superiors who were probably weighing the same impossible math. I chose 32 children over revenge. That's not surrender. Subject 48, the older woman spoke for the first time in minutes. You're all thinking about this wrong. The program doesn't end with Samuel's arrest. It ends when we decide to end it. The survivors, the subjects, we're the only ones who can truly shut it down. She looked at the monitors showing the other survivors in the dining room. Because we're the ones who carry the knowledge, the genetic data, the lived experience. If we refuse to participate, refuse to be studied, refuse to let them use us as proof of concept, it ends. It was the most radical solution yet, not legal justice, not public exposure, but collective refusal. The subjects withdrawing their cooperation, their bodies, their stories, rendering the entire program meaningless by denying it the very thing it needed most, them. This mirrors resistance movements throughout history. Hunger strikes in prisons, where inmates weaponize their own bodies. The Montgomery bus boycott, where economic withdrawal created change. The Me Too silence breakers, who refused to let their trauma be used as leverage. Sarah nodded slowly. We demand conditions, medical care, real compensation, legal identities, protection from future exploitation, and we keep copies of everything. If Highland resurfaces in any form, we release it all. She looked at Samuel VI. You taught us to be strategic, to think. Like you, congratulations, it worked. The marshal received another call. This time the conversation lasted 3 minutes. When she hung up, her expression was unreadable. Justice Department agrees to terms. Samuel Harlan VI will be taken into federal custody under sealed indictment. Highland facilities will be raided simultaneously by international task forces. Foundation members will face charges under the Nuremberg Code and federal trafficking statutes. Proceedings closed to protect victims. Survivors will receive full medical care, compensation, and legal identities through witness protection protocols. The program ends when we refuse to participate. Torres expected relief, victory, something. Instead, he felt hollow. Samuel VI was being handcuffed, reading his rights aloud by a federal agent. The Foundation members upstairs would be arrested. The offshore facilities would be shut down. But the 2,400 modified children would never know. Their families would never know. The conspiracy would be buried under classification stamps and sealed court records. Emma sat down heavily on the floor, back against the wall, head in her hands. Sarah wheeled over and placed her twisted hand on her sister's shoulder. They didn't speak. Torres raised his camera, the backup camera he'd kept in his jacket, and took one photo. 2 sisters. One who'd fought in the light. One who'd survived in darkness. Both of them exhausted. The marshal approached Torres. That camera needs to be surrendered. Evidence in a federal investigation. Torres ejected the memory card and handed it to her, but she didn't know about the photos he'd already uploaded to a cloud server, or the notes he'd been keeping on his phone, or the fact that while federal proceedings might be sealed, history had a way of leaking. As the federal agents began evacuating the building, Torres noticed something on the monitors. One of the younger Harlan siblings, Subject 64, the girl who'd said she was healthy, was talking to one of the Foundation members. Marcus Voss. They were speaking quietly away from the others, and Marcus was writing something down, giving her something. Contact information, instructions. Tors zoomed the camera. The girl pocketed the paper and smiled. Not all the connections were being severed. Not all the program's children wanted protection. Some of them wanted to continue. Tors published his photographs under a pseudonym, and within 48 hours, someone tried to kill him. December 2024. Charleston was buried under 6 inches of snow when Tor's photo essay appeared in a small independent journalism outlet called the Appalachian Truth Project. He titled its subjects, A Study in Inherited Trauma. No names, no locations, just photographs of abandoned estates, empty hospital corridors, and close-ups of medical documents with identifying information redacted. Artistic, abstract, haunting. The essay went viral not because people understood what they were seeing, but because they felt it. The weight of something terrible compressed into images that looked like art but smelled like evidence. Tors was in his apartment editing new work when the carbon monoxide detector started screaming. He checked it 3 days ago, new batteries, fully functional. But his head was already swimming, vision blurring at the edges. He stumbled to the window, threw it open, gulped freezing air. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. No gas appliances. No furnace malfunction. Someone had pumped carbon monoxide through the ventilation system. As he leaned out the window, gasping, Tor saw a white van parked across the street, unmarked, engine running, a figure in the driver's seat watching his window. When Tors made eye contact, the van pulled away. Slowly, deliberately, a message, not an escape. He called 911. Fire department arrived in 8 minutes. They found elevated CO levels throughout the building. Someone had tampered with the main HVAC system. "You're lucky you were home," the fire chief said. "If you'd been asleep, you'd be dead." Tors knew it wasn't luck. It was warning. Stop digging, stop publishing, or next time we won't miss. Tors received an unmarked envelope the next morning. Inside, a burner phone and a note in handwriting he recognized from the cellar walls. Emma's. "They know about your cloud backup. Wipe everything. Meet me at the coordinates below. Come alone. Destroy this after reading." The coordinates led to a rest stop off I-77, 2 hours south. Tors arrived at midnight, snow falling in thick curtains that swallowed his headlights. Emma's car was already there, a nondescript sedan with rental plates. She was sitting in the driver's seat, engine off, windows fogging. Tors slid into the passenger side. Her face looked older than it had 3 months ago, the lines around her eyes deeper. "You shouldn't have published," she said without preamble. "The deal included silence. You violated it." Tors kept his voice level. "The deal you made, I didn't sign anything. I'm a journalist. I document." Emma's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You're a target. Marcus Voss is out on bail. 2 Foundation members were released pending trial, technicalities, jurisdictional disputes, and Samuel," she paused, choosing words carefully. "Samuel escaped federal custody 3 weeks ago, in transit to a secure facility. The convoy was ambushed, 2 agents killed. He's gone." When the powerful can rewrite the consequences of their crimes in real time, does justice become a fiction we tell ourselves to sleep at night? Tors felt ice that had nothing to do with the weather. How does someone escape federal custody? Emma pulled out a tablet, not the one from the mansion, a new device, and showed him classified documents. Because 4 members of the transport team were on Sovereign Solutions payroll. Because the federal prosecutor handling the case recused himself after pressure from above. Because the judge who approved the sealed indictment received a $2.3 million anonymous donation to his family's charitable foundation 2 days before setting bail terms. The system hadn't failed. It had been purchased. This mirrors modern reality where Jeffrey Epstein died in federal custody under impossible circumstances, where wealthy defendants routinely receive suspended sentences for crimes that destroy lives, where pharmaceutical executives paid billions in fines for the opioid crisis but never saw a single day in prison. Money doesn't just buy freedom, it rewrites reality. Published under pseudonym, 48 hours later, carbon monoxide. Emma handed Tors a folder. Inside, photographs, recent photographs. Subject 64, the teenager who'd been talking to Marcus Voss at the mansion. She was standing outside a fertility clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina. Different clinic, different city, but same logo Tors had seen in the files, a subsidiary of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. She didn't want protection, Emma said quietly. She wanted employment. Marcus hired her as a genetic counselor. She's 19 years old and helping rich couples select embryos with optimal genetic profiles. And she's good at it. Tors stared at the photograph. The girl looked healthy, confident, smiling at patients entering the clinic. You're telling me the program is still operating, Emma nodded. Not the same way, not with forced breeding and secret laboratories, but the philosophy, the genetics, the belief that some bloodlines are superior. She pulled up another photo on her tablet. A conference. International Symposium on Genomic Excellence, Singapore, January 2025. Keynote speaker, Dr. Adrian Whitmore, son of Jonathan Whitmore. Topic: The future of hereditary optimization. The program hadn't ended. It had gone legitimate, rebranded as genetic wellness and hereditary health optimization. And because the public never learned about Highland, about the Harlan bloodline, about the decades of torture disguised as research, there was no outrage, no scandal, just another medical advancement marketed to parents who wanted the best for their children. Tors felt sick. Why are you showing me this? Emma's expression was grim. Because Sarah was wrong. Protecting those 32 children was the moral choice. But it gave the program cover to continue. The modified births aren't evidence of a crime now, they're proof of concept for a legitimate industry. And I need you to decide. Do we expose everything, children included, and burn it all down? Or do we keep fighting quietly, protecting individuals while the machine keeps running? Subject 64 works at a fertility clinic. Genetic counselor, age 19. Tors asked the question that had been clawing at him since October. Where's Sarah? Emma's silence lasted too long. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the wind outside. Sarah's dead. November 15th. Carbon monoxide poisoning in her apartment. Ruled accidental, but her ventilation system had been tampered with. Same method they tried on you. Tors felt the world tilt. She was in witness protection. How did they? Emma cut him off. Because Samuel knew. He'd been planning the escape before they even arrested him. He had names, addresses, details on everyone who testified. Sarah was the first target. You were the second. She started the car. There are 14 more survivors from the mansion on his list, and I can't protect them all. Tors looked at the folder again, at Subject 64's smiling face, at the conference promotional materials, at the future of eugenics dressed in medical respectability. What do you need from me? Emma pulled out a second burner phone and handed it to him. Document everything, but don't publish. Not yet. Build a case so airtight that when we do release it, they can't kill enough people to stop it. Can you do that? Tors thought about Sarah, about the survivors, about the 2,400 modified children who'd never know what they carried in their blood, about the hollowness of justice that protected the guilty to spare the innocent. He took the phone. "I can do that." Emma drove away first, taillights disappearing into the snow. Tor sat alone in his car, engine running for warmth, and opened the folder one more time. At the bottom was a photograph he'd missed, a Polaroid recent showing Emma and Sarah together, smiling. It was dated October 27, 2024, the night before the mansion gathering, before everything fell apart. On the back, in Sarah's labored handwriting, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Finish what we started, not for revenge, for the ones who come after. S." Tor started his car. He had work to do. But in his rearview mirror he saw headlights. A white van, engine running, following. Tors led the white van on a 3-hour chase through back roads, then realized it wasn't following him. It was hurting him. The van stayed exactly 4 car lengths behind, never closer, never falling back. Tors took random turns, doubled back through neighborhoods, even pulled into a 24-hour diner and waited for 20 minutes. The van waited too, idling in the parking lot across the street, exhaust rising in white plumes against the December night. When Tors pulled back onto the highway, the van followed. At mile marker 47, Tor's GPS stopped working. His phone lost signal. And the road signs ahead were covered in black plastic, making it impossible to tell which exit was which. Tor's hands tightened on the wheel. They weren't chasing him. They were guiding him, forcing him onto a specific route. He floored the accelerator, trying to outrun them, but the van matched his speed effortlessly. Then the engine light came on. His car began to lose power, sputtering, slowing. Tors remembered the van he'd seen outside his apartment. It had been parked there for hours, long enough to plant a remote kill switch in his vehicle. His car coasted to a stop on the shoulder of a dark 2-lane highway surrounded by forest. No houses, no lights, just trees and snow, and the van pulling up behind him. 2 figures emerged, not the tactical gear from the mansion. These were dressed like ordinary people, jeans, winter coats, gloves, but they moved with military precision, flanking his car, covering angles. The driver's side door opened. A woman, mid-40s. Tors recognized her from the Foundation files. Margaret Pemberton, heiress to a defense contracting fortune, 3rd-generation Foundation member. "Mr. Tors," she said, voice calm as if they were meeting for coffee. "You've been difficult to reach. We need to have a conversation." Margaret slid into Tor's passenger seat uninvited while her associate stood guard outside. She pulled out a tablet, seemed everyone had tablets now, and showed him a video. It was Tor's apartment, live feed, current. Someone was inside, going through his files, his computer, his backup drives. "We're not here to threaten you," Margaret said. "We're here to make you an offer." Tors forced his voice steady. "I'm not interested in," she cut him off. $50 million deposited in an offshore account, full legal immunity, a new identity if you want it, and guaranteed safety for anyone you care about." She paused. "In exchange for your silence, permanent silence. No more articles, no more photographs, no more investigation." Tors stared at her. $50 million. More money than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Enough to disappear. Enough to protect Emma, to fund the survivor's medical care, to do real good. And all he had to do was stop. Margaret must have seen the hesitation on his face because she pressed further. "Or you can refuse, and we'll release evidence that you fabricated your photo essay, falsified documents, collaborated with Emma Marsh, a woman with a documented history of paranoid delusions, to create an elaborate conspiracy theory. If accepting blood money lets you fund the resistance, does the compromise corrupt the mission or enable it?" Margaret pulled out a folder. Inside, fabricated emails between Tors and Emma discussing how to make the story more sensational. photoshopped images showing tours at locations he'd never been, and most damning, a psychiatric evaluation of Emma from 1997 detailing her dissociative episodes and paranoid belief in systematic family persecution. We've already ceded this narrative to 3 major news outlets, Margaret said quietly. If you refuse our offer, these documents go live. Your credibility is destroyed. Your career ends. And the survivors you're trying to protect, they become delusional conspiracy theorists in the public eye. This was character assassination as a weapon, not unlike the smear campaigns against whistleblowers like Reality Winner, who was painted as unstable and untrustworthy, or Edward Snowden, framed as a traitor rather than a truth-teller, or Dr. Li Wenliang, the Chinese doctor who warned about COVID-19 and was forced to recant before dying of the virus. The powerful don't just silence dissent. They discredit it so thoroughly that truth becomes indistinguishable from delusion. Torres looked at the live feed of his apartment being ransacked, then at the $50 million bank statement Margaret had prepared. His name was already on it, account active, just waiting for his acceptance. What about Samuel? Torres asked. He's still out there, still hunting survivors. Your offer doesn't stop him. 50 million, permanent silence, or total character destruction. Margaret's expression shifted, something that might have been genuine regret. Samuel's not hunting survivors, Mr. Torres. Samuel's dead. He was killed 2 weeks ago. Officially, he's still at large. But between you and me, we terminated him. He became a liability, too unstable, too visible. The foundation survives by staying invisible. Samuel wanted glory, so we removed him. Torres felt his reality shift again. You killed your own, Margaret interrupted. He wasn't ours, not anymore. He'd gone rogue, started making modifications without oversight, started believing his own propaganda about genetic superiority. We're a business, Mr. Torres, not a cult. When an asset becomes a liability, you cut losses. She pulled out a photograph. Samuel Harlan VI's body, unmistakable. This stays classified, but you needed to know, because Sarah's death. That was Samuel acting alone. We didn't order it. We didn't sanction it. And when we found out, we corrected the problem. Torres struggled to process. The foundation had killed Samuel, murdered their own creation, because he'd become too zealous, too dangerous. The machine was eating itself. If Samuel's dead, Torres said slowly, who's on the list? Who's targeting the other survivors? Margaret's smile was cold. No one. The list was Samuel's personal vendetta. The rest of the foundation wants this buried, not expanded. We're offering you money to disappear. We're offering the survivors safety, not out of benevolence, out of pragmatism. Exposure helps no one. Silence benefits everyone. She pulled out a pen and a contract. Sign this. Walk away. Live your life. Or refuse, and we destroy your credibility so thoroughly that even Emma won't believe you anymore. Samuel's not at large. He's dead. We killed him. Torres stared at the contract. The pen. The $50 million account. His ruined apartment on the tablet screen. And he thought about Sarah's note. Finish what we started. Not for revenge. For the ones who come after. He thought about the 2,400 modified children who'd never know. About Subject 64 working at a fertility clinic, continuing the program under a new name. About the Singapore conference in January, where hereditary optimization would be presented as the future of medicine. I need time to think, Torres said. Margaret shook her head. You have 30 seconds. This offer expires when I leave this car, because in 31 seconds those fabricated documents go live and your life as you know it ends. She started counting, out loud. 30, 29, 28. Torres reached for the pen. His hand was shaking. Margaret smiled. Good choice. But as Tor's fingers touched the pen, his backup phone, the one Emma had given him, vibrated in his pocket. A single text, no words, just coordinates and a time, 3:00 a.m. Tonight. Tors looked at Margaret, at the contract, at the pen, at the countdown she was still performing. 12, 11, 10. He made his decision. He opened the car door and ran. Into the forest, into the snow, into darkness. Margaret's voice followed him. You just chose poverty and irrelevance, Mr. Tors. By morning, you'll be a joke. Tors didn't look back. He had 3 hours to reach Emma's coordinates. His car was disabled. His phone was compromised. And he was 15 miles from anywhere. But he had the story, the truth, and as long as he was breathing, that still mattered. Behind him, he heard Margaret make a call. He refused. Initiate Protocol 7. Tors ran faster. Tors made it 3 miles through the forest before he heard the dogs. The snow was deeper off-road, reaching mid-calf, each step a struggle that burned his thighs and stole his breath. His dress shoes he'd never changed after meeting Emma were soaked through, his toes already going numb. The forest was absolute darkness, punctuated by the pale glow of snow, trees looming like sentries, branches catching his jacket and face. Tors checked the burner phone Emma had given him. The coordinates were northwest, 12 miles remaining, battery at 43%. And then he heard them, the unmistakable baying of tracking dogs, maybe a mile back, getting closer. Protocol 7. Margaret had activated something that involved hunting him down like an animal. Tors pushed harder, ignoring the burning in his lungs, the ice forming on his eyebrows and beard. He'd photographed conflict zones, climbed mountains for the perfect shot, spent days in hostile territory. But this was different. This was West Virginia wilderness in December, with professionals tracking him and 3 hours to cover impossible distance. The dogs were getting closer. Tors could hear men's voices now, coordinating through radios, efficient and emotionless. He splashed through a half-frozen creek, hopping the water would break his scent trail. His feet screamed with cold. The current tried to sweep him downstream, but he fought across, pulling himself up the opposite bank with roots and frozen mud. As he crested the bank, his phone vibrated. Another text from Emma. They have thermal imaging. Cold water won't help. Find the old mining tunnels. 2 miles north of your position. GPS coordinates attached. Torres found the mining tunnel entrance behind a collapsed fence marked with danger, unstable ground signs from the 1970s. The entrance was partially sealed with rusted metal bars, but weather and time had created gaps wide enough to squeeze through. He slipped inside just as flashlight beams swept the area behind him. The tunnel smelled like wet stone and decades of decay. Tors moved deeper, using his phone's dim light sparingly to preserve battery. The passage narrowed, then opened into a larger chamber with old mining equipment rusted into abstract sculptures. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a countdown. He heard the dogs reach the tunnel entrance, barking, frantic, but they wouldn't enter. Animals knew better than humans when to avoid dangerous places. A man's voice carried into the tunnel. Subject entered the Harlan mine, north entrance, requesting permission to pursue. A pause, then, negative, too unstable, will cover all exits and wait him out. He's got no food, no water, no cold weather gear. He'll either come out or die in there. Tors felt relief and terror in equal measure. They weren't coming in, but they also weren't leaving, and Emma's coordinates were still 8 miles away, on the other side of a mountain. How many times can a person choose danger over safety before the choice becomes suicide instead of courage? Tors moved deeper into the mine, following the main shaft. The tunnel system was larger than he'd expected, multiple passages branching off. Some collapsed, others descending into flooded darkness. His phone battery was at 31%. He used it to check the map Emma had sent. The mining tunnels connected to an underground network that extended for miles. And according to the map, one passage emerged 3 miles northwest, closer to Emma's coordinates. But the route required going down. Deep down, through sections marked FLOODED and collapse risk. This was the reality of investigative journalism in the digital age. The truth had become worth dying for because the powerful had made survival and integrity mutually exclusive. It mirrored the experiences of journalists like Jamal Khashoggi, murdered for reporting, or Daphne Caruana Galizia, killed by a car bomb for exposing corruption, or Anna Politkovskaya, shot in her apartment building for documenting war crimes. The costs kept rising, the protections kept shrinking, and the stories kept needing to be told. Tors descended. The air grew colder, wetter. His breath came in visible clouds. The passage narrowed until he had to turn sideways, rock pressing against his chest and back. His phone slipped from his numb fingers once, clattering into water below. He caught it just before it sank, hands shaking so badly he could barely maintain grip. 23% battery, 6 miles to go, and the water was rising. 3 miles in, then he heard the dogs. Torres emerged from a secondary shaft opening 2 hours later, soaked to the chest, hypothermic, but only 4 miles from Emma's coordinates. His phone was at 7% battery. The forest around this exit was different, less dense, more signs of human activity. Tire tracks in the snow, recent, and voices, not Margaret's hunters, different voices. Emma's voice. Torres stumbled toward the sound. His legs barely worked, feet completely numb, body shaking with cold so violent his teeth chattered audibly. He found them in a clearing, Emma and 6 others. Some Torres recognized from the mansion, survivors. Subject 48, the older woman, Michael, Subject 12, and 3 others he'd never seen. They'd built a small fire concealed in a depression that hid the light. Emma saw him first. Jesus, Torres. She and Michael pulled him to the fire, wrapped him in thermal blankets, forced hot liquid down his throat. Margaret Pemberton tried to buy me, Torres managed through shaking. 50 million, I refused. She activated Protocol 7. Emma exchanged looks with Subject 48. The older woman spoke. Protocol 7 is termination with prejudice. You're not supposed to survive it. How did you? Torres showed her the burner phone. You told me about the mines. Emma shook her head slowly. I didn't text you about mines. I sent you these coordinates, nothing else. Tor's blood went cold despite the fire. He pulled up the messages. The text about thermal imaging and mining tunnels was from a different number, not Emma's. Someone else had guided him through the tunnels. Someone who wanted him to survive, and they'd perfectly intercepted his location and timing. Michael leaned forward, his weathered face serious. Someone inside the Foundation helped you. That's the only explanation. They have access to Margaret's operations. They knew about Protocol 7, and they want you alive. Subject 48 added, or they want you to lead them to us, to Emma, to everyone she's been hiding. Phone at 7%, 4 miles left, hypothermic. Emma's phone buzzed. She read the message and her face went pale. Margaret Pemberton was found dead an hour ago, in her car, carbon monoxide poisoning, ruled accidental. The group went silent. Torres felt reality fracturing again. Someone's killing Foundation members, Emma nodded slowly. Margaret's the third in 2 months. After Samuel and after Jonathan Whitmore's daughter, the one who died in a skiing accident 3 weeks ago. Subject 48 stood, packing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. The Foundation is eating itself. Samuel went rogue, so they killed him. But now someone inside is eliminating the others. Maybe someone who thinks the whole organization has become too exposed, too risky. Tors asked the question they were all thinking. Or maybe someone who wants to take control, remove the old guard and rebuild it their own way. Emma's phone buzzed again, this time with a video file. No message, no sender information. She hesitated, then played it. The video showed a conference room, clean, modern, Singapore skyline visible through the windows, and seated at the table, Subject 64, the 19-year-old genetic counselor, but she wasn't alone. Around the table, 12 people Tors didn't recognize, young, healthy, all sharing subtle variations of the Harlan features. Subject 64 spoke directly to the camera. Hello, Emma. Hello, Tors. By the time you watch this, the old foundation will be gone, dissolved, extinct. My generation doesn't believe in their methods. We don't need force or secrecy. We have something better, time. We're already integrated into society. Working in fertility clinics, genetic counseling firms, medical research. We don't need to hide. We're the future. And the future doesn't ask permission from the past. She smiled. Mother Sarah always said we should choose what kind of people we want to be. We've chosen. We're choosing evolution over extinction, science over sentiment, and we're already in your bloodlines, your hospitals, your governments. You can't stop what you can't see. The video ended. Emma's hand was shaking. Tor's phone, still at 7%, vibrated one final time. A text from the unknown number that had saved him. They're right, you can't stop them, but you can document them. January 3rd, Singapore, International Symposium on Genomic Excellence. Film everything. Show the world what the future looks like. A friend inside. Tors looked at Emma. Who sent this? She was staring at the fire, expression unreadable. I don't know, but whoever it is, they just invited us into the dragon's nest. The unknown number sent coordinates to a safe house, and when Tors arrived, he found Richard Carlyle's daughter waiting inside. Emma insisted on approaching the safe house alone first, leaving Tors and the survivors in a van 2 blocks away. She returned 15 minutes later, face unreadable. It's legitimate, and you need to see this. The safe house was a modest apartment in a Richmond suburb, the kind of place that disappeared into middle-class anonymity. But inside, it was transformed, walls covered in printouts, photographs, flow charts connecting foundation members across decades. And sitting at a kitchen table covered in documents. Alexandra Carlyle, 41 years old, looking exactly like her father except for the determination in her eyes that suggested she'd made peace with consequences Richard had feared. My father gave you the USB drive with foundation records, Alexandra said without preamble. But he didn't give you everything. He couldn't, because some of the files required biometric authentication, his fingerprint, his retinal scan. When he died in March, I inherited his access, and I've been compiling what he never could. She gestured to the walls, 8 months of work, every foundation transaction since 1921, every birth, every death, every facility. Every politician who'd received donations, every judge who'd ruled in their favor, and at the center, a web connecting it all to corporations that no longer seemed related to eugenics but touched every aspect of modern life. Tors stared at the scope. This isn't just about the Harlan bloodline anymore. Alexandra nodded. It never was. The Harlan family was the proof of concept. Samuel III's research gave the foundation the data they needed to understand genetic collapse, but they weren't trying to preserve one family. They were trying to engineer humanity. She pulled up a document on her laptop, a 1954 internal memo titled Project Genesis, Long-Term Integration Strategy. The memo outlined a 100-year plan. Phase 1, Study inbreeding effects to understand genetic boundaries. Phase 2. Develop modification techniques to overcome those boundaries. Phase 3. Integrate modified genetics into elite bloodlines through voluntary means, fertility clinics, sperm banks, adoption agencies. Phase 4. Wait for those modified individuals to rise into positions of power naturally. By Generation 5, the memo read, Foundation genetics will be present in an estimated 15–20% of global leadership positions, without forced breeding or public knowledge. Emma sank into a chair. How far along are they? Alexandra pulled up a spreadsheet. We're in year 70 of a 100-year plan. By my calculations, modified genetics are present in approximately 8% of current U.S. congressional members' families, 12% of Fortune 500 CEO lineages, and 6% of federal judiciary families. Most don't know. Their parents used fertility treatments, genetic screening, premium donor services, all run by foundation-affiliated clinics. If you engineer society slowly enough that no one notices the change, is it still a conspiracy or just evolution by another name? Torres thought about Subject 64's video. We're already integrated. They weren't lying. This wasn't science fiction dystopia. This was methodical, patient, multi-generational social engineering, and it mirrored real-world patterns. How the wealthy already use genetic screening to select embryos for intelligence and health. How Silicon Valley executives already microdose for cognitive enhancement. How Chinese scientists already created gene-edited bobbies. The foundation didn't need to take over. They just needed to make their version of optimal genetics indistinguishable from normal medical advancement. Michael Subject 12 spoke for the first time since entering the safe house. His voice was still slurred, but his eyes were sharp. You said, your father couldn't give everything. What changed? Why? Help us now? Alexandra's expression hardened. Because my 16-year-old daughter used a foundation-affiliated fertility preservation service last month for future use. Standard procedure for young women who want career flexibility before having children. Egg freezing. Genetic screening for abnormalities. She pulled up her daughter's medical file. The clinic added something to her profile without consent. A genetic marker, foundation-coded. When I traced it, I found she'd been flagged as a priority integration candidate, daughter of former foundation trustee, good genetic baseline, likely to marry within professional class. They marked her for optimization without telling us. They were going to modify her eggs and she'd never know. Carlisle's daughter, she has everything her father couldn't access. Alexandra wasn't just documenting the foundation. She'd been sabotaging it. Over the last 6 months, I've anonymously reported 12 foundation-affiliated clinics to state medical boards. 3 have been shut down for record-keeping violations. I've also been leaking genetic markers to independent researchers who can identify foundation modifications in blood samples. And I'm the one who sent Margaret Pemberton's security schedules to the assassin who killed her. The room went silent. Emma recovered first. You had Margaret killed. Alexandra met her gaze without flinching. Margaret ordered the carbon monoxide attack on Sarah. I had proof. Security footage from the building, payment records to Sovereign Solutions. But federal prosecutors wouldn't touch her, too connected, too wealthy. So I found someone who would. A former Highland subject who'd been held at Facility 7 in Singapore for 18 years. I sent him everything he needed to find Margaret. He did the rest. Torres felt his moral compass spinning. You're assassinating Foundation members. Alexandra corrected him coldly. I'm removing obstacles to justice. There's a difference. Margaret would have killed 14 more survivors before any court touched her. Now she can't. She pulled up a list on her laptop. 9 foundation leadership members remain. 8 of them are attending the Singapore Symposium in January. That's where we end this. Not with federal cases that get buried. Not with public exposure that gets dismissed as conspiracy theory. But with documentation so thorough, so undeniable, that their own children can't defend them. This was justice as guerrilla warfare, not unlike the Mossad's decades-long hunt for Nazi war criminals, or the recent trend of ransomware groups attacking cartels and human traffickers, or hacker collectives exposing corporate corruption when courts won't. When legal systems fail to protect victims, victims create their own systems, and those systems don't file appeals. She's not just documenting, she's been sabotaging them for months. Subject 48 stood, examining Alexandra's wall of evidence. You want us to go to Singapore, film the symposium, create irrefutable documentation. Then what? Release it and hope the world cares. Alexandra shook her head. No, we don't hope, we engineer the response. She pulled up another document, a list of journalists, politicians, advocacy groups, all pre-positioned. I've spent 8 months building a coalition. People who have been harmed by genetic discrimination. Disability rights advocates, bioethics researchers, international human rights organizations. When we release the documentation, it won't be random. It'll be coordinated, simultaneous, across 30 countries, too big to suppress, too documented to dismiss. Torres looked at the plan. It was brilliant, overwhelming, and absolutely dependent on getting that footage from Singapore. How do we get into the symposium? It's invitation only. Security will be, Alexandra smiled for the first time. I'm a registered attendee, daughter of a former foundation trustee, now working in independent genetic consulting. They think I'm continuing my father's work. I've been deepening my cover for months. I can get 4 people in as my research team. Emma was already thinking tactically. 4 people, me, Tors, and 2 others. We'll need backup equipment, encrypted transmission, dead man switches in case we're caught. Alexandra interrupted. Already prepared, but there's a complication. The symposium isn't just a conference, it's an initiation. Subject 64 and her generation are formally taking control of the foundation. They're going to present their transition plan, how they'll phase out the old guard and rebrand everything as legitimate genomic wellness. And they're inviting the old guard to either join them or retire. Michael's slurred voice cut through. Retire means killed like Margaret, like the others, the young ones, are eliminating threats. Alexandra nodded. Which means if we're caught filming, we won't be arrested or discredited. We'll simply disappear. And the foundation will continue. Younger, smarter, cleaner. Tors thought about Sarah's note. Finish what we started. For the ones who come after. He looked at Emma. At the survivors. At Alexandra's daughter's medical file, marked with genetic codes she'd never consented to. When do we leave for Singapore? He asked. Alexandra pulled up plane tickets. December 28th. We have 12 days to prepare. And Tors, she handed him a new camera, military grade. This time, don't let them take the footage. But as the group began planning logistics, Tor's burner phone vibrated one final time. The unknown number again. But this message was different. Alexandra Carlyle is compromised. She doesn't know it yet, but the foundation does. You're being led into a trap. A real friend. Tors lowered the camera, the red recording light flickering against his trembling hand. For a moment the room felt weightless, like time itself was holding its breath. The monitors behind him pulsed with static, then cleared, showing the dining room again. The foundation members were frozen, staring at Samuel VI as though seeing something divine or monstrous. Samuel moved closer to the camera, his expression calm, almost tender. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said softly. "The collapse isn't a curse, it's evolution. Nature doesn't destroy weak bloodlines, it rewrites them. We are the rewrite." Tor's throat was dry. "You're creating a species that shouldn't exist." Samuel smiled. "We already exist, you're just late to notice." Behind him, one of his younger siblings, the girl with auburn hair, stepped forward, eyes glowing under the harsh fluorescent light. "They used to call us monsters," she said quietly. "Now they call us prototypes." The monitors flashed. DNA sequences scrolled across the screens, overlaid with human silhouettes and organ schematics. A line of text appeared. "Project Harlan, Human Stability Protocol active." Tor's pulse hammered in his ears. "You're running live experiments," he whispered. Samuel nodded. "Every generation is closer to perfection. No disease, no decay, no death before design. My children will be the first humans born without genetic error." He turned, gesturing toward the teenagers behind him. "You're looking at the next chapter of evolution, Mr. Torres, designed, controlled, eternal." Emma's voice echoed from somewhere above, the audio catching her ragged breathing through the intercom system. "Eternal," she spat. "You're not fixing humanity, Samuel, you're erasing it." The monitors flickered again, this time switching to live feeds of the upper floors. Emma was moving through the mansion like a shadow, blood streaked across her temple, tablet clutched in one hand. She stopped at the dining room door, staring through the one-way glass. "She's heading for the control panel," Torres murmured. Samuel didn't move. "Let her." On the screen, Emma typed rapidly into the system terminal, bypassing access codes with the same precision Samuel used. Then, the alarms began to sound, deep, resonant, mechanical tones that shook the walls. Samuel looked at Torres, still smiling. "She thinks she's shutting it down, but she's turning it on." The monitors changed again, camera feeds shifting to a new location. A subterranean chamber beneath the observation room, one Torres hadn't seen before. Inside, rows of glass tanks glowed faint blue, each one holding something that moved, slowly, rhythmically, alive. Torres felt his stomach twist. They were embryos, hundreds of them. "This is the Foundation's true legacy," Samuel said. "The ones who will outlive us all." Emma's voice came over the intercom, furious and trembling. "You're still playing God with corpses and code. You're building the same prison they built for us." Samuel tilted his head. "And yet you came back here, Emma, to finish it, to make sure it ends with you." Torres grabbed the nearest console. "If she's activating the main system, what happens to the embryos?" Samuel looked almost sympathetic. "They hatch." The sound hit like thunder, the rumbling beneath the floor, glass cracking, fluid hissing through pipes. On the monitors, tanks began to shatter, one after another, releasing plumes of vapor and the shapes inside. The Foundation members screamed. The survivors backed away. And from the blue mist, the forms began to crawl out. Translucent, incomplete eyes flickering open like mirrors catching light. Torres turned to Samuel. "You're insane, you can't control this." Samuel's calm didn't waver. "You think this is chaos, it's birth." The observation room lights dimmed to red. Emma's voice came again, faint, choked with static. "I'm not letting another generation live like this, Samuel. You want evolution, then evolve from extinction." A final warning flashed across the main monitor. "Override initiated, purge sequence engaged." Samuel's eyes widened for the first time. Tors backed away. What did she do? She activated the fail-safe, Samuel muttered. The one I disabled 20 years ago. He turned to the monitors, his reflection flickering in the glass as the countdown began. 000459. 000458. Emma appeared in the doorway behind Tors, bloodied, breathing hard. Get out, she said. Now. Tors hesitated. What about you? She looked past him to the monitors. Her sister Sarah still on the feed, sitting in the wheelchair, whispering to the terrified Foundation members. Someone has to end it where it started. Samuel stepped forward, face illuminated by the crimson countdown glow. You can't stop what's in the blood, Emma. She raised her tablet, meeting his eyes. No, but I can make sure it never leaves this house. 000400. The mansion groaned, metal contracting, doors locking, ventilation revering. Tors ran. The sound was not an explosion. It was a roar, the house itself inhaling before the end. Pipes screamed, glass shattered, and the air filled with the hiss of gas and the sharp sting of ozone. The countdown on the monitor pulsed like a heartbeat. 000342. 000341. Tors stumbled through the corridor, every step echoing like footsteps in a tomb. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch him, the hollow eyes of the Harlan children, each face lit red by the emergency lights. Their painted mouths twisted in the flicker, like they were trying to warn him to run faster. He reached the staircase, smoke curling down from the upper floor. Somewhere above, something heavy collapsed, steel on stone. He could hear Emma and Samuel arguing through the intercom, their voices fragmented by static. Emma, you never learned, Samuel. You can't cure corruption. Samuel, I didn't create corruption, I evolved from it. The words bled together as the intercom fizzed out. Tors forced his way into the main hall, lungs burning. The dining room door stood open, and for the first time he saw the Foundation members up close, stripped of their arrogance, crawling across the marble like insects fleeing fire. Sarah was still in her chair, her face bathed in flickering red light. Her eyes found Tors, calm amid chaos. It's ending, she whispered. The blood remembers. Behind her, Samuel's siblings, subjects 48, 53, 61, had gathered around him in the observation room, pleading, terrified. But Samuel's expression had changed. The confidence was gone. In its place, awe. He stared at the monitors as blue flames rippled through the lower chambers, consuming the embryo tanks in waves. The creatures, half-formed, breathing, were burning, their silhouettes melting into light. Tors burst into the observation room just as Samuel turned toward him. She destroyed everything, Samuel said softly. Decades of work, centuries of evolution. Tors raised the camera again, even as the air shimmered from the heat. No, he said. She ended the experiment. The countdown blared its final minute. 0000, 5900, 0058. Emma appeared in the doorway. Her tablet cracked, blood dripping from her wrist where glass had cut deep. You don't understand, Samuel. Evolution doesn't mean survival. It means adaptation, learning when to stop. Samuel's face twisted. And you call extinction an adaptation? Emma's voice broke, but her eyes were steady. It's mercy. She raised her hand and pressed the final command on the tablet. Every monitor went white. The building convulsed, not like a bomb, but like the earth itself was rejecting the structure. Walls buckled. The marble floor split down the center, releasing a column of steam that swallowed the room in sound. Torres felt his body lifted, weightless for a second. Then everything went dark. When the light returned, it was dawn. The Harlan estate was gone, reduced to a crater ringed by twisted rebar and blackened trees. Fire crews stood in disbelief. Nothing remained but heat and silence. They found one survivor in the woods, half conscious, covered in ash and blood. Michael Torres. He was clutching a melted camera, its memory card fused but intact. 2 weeks later, a video leaked online. It was shaky, grainy, but real. The footage showed the Foundation's dinner, the survivors, the confrontation, Sarah's trembling voice, Emma's face framed by red light, and Samuel V.I. speaking the words that would haunt the world. "We can fix it. We can rewrite the blood." The video spread faster than the government could contain it. Within days, news anchors spoke of the Harlan files. Within weeks, lawsuits. Within months, investigations that reached into boardrooms, clinics, and government agencies. And within a year, the name Harlan became synonymous with evil. But something didn't add up. When rescue teams analyzed the wreckage, they found 2 sets of footprints leading away from the blast site. One matched Tor's. The other was smaller, barefoot. DNA analysis from a strand of hair found in the woods returned an impossible result. 96% match to Emma Marsh. But Emma Marsh was confirmed dead in the blast. 6 months later, Oslo, Norway. A security camera captured footage of a woman leaving a biomedical conference. Narrow-set eyes, widow's peak, the same walk as Emma. She carried a briefcase marked with the insignia of a new biotech company, Evolgen Laboratories. Inside that briefcase, authorities later discovered, was a vial of blood, unregistered, untraceable. The label read, Project H Generation 1, viable. Because some bloodlines don't die. They adapt, and the disease learns to heal itself. Snow fell like ash over Oslo. The kind of snow that carried silence, thick, slow, deliberate. Inside Evolgen Laboratories, the world's most advanced genetic research company, everything was sterile glass and white light. But beneath the gleaming surface, the ghosts of the Harlan family were still whispering through the wires. Michael Torres stood in the observation gallery, older now, limping slightly from injuries that never healed right. His reflection merged with the glass, one man staring into the future he had tried to destroy. Below him, scientists in white coats moved like choreographed phantoms between rows of incubation pods. Each pod held a developing fetus, suspended in translucent fluid that shimmered under ultraviolet light. A new kind of creation. Perfect, planned, quiet. The door behind Tor's hissed open. Emma walked in. She looked younger than she should have, or maybe just different. Her eyes were clearer, her skin too smooth for her age. She wore no lab coat, no badge, just black gloves and a small silver locket, the same one Tor's had found broken years ago. Only now it was whole. "You survived," Tor's whispered. Emma smiled faintly. "Did I?" He turned to her fully. "You destroyed the mansion, the foundation, everything." "I erased the corruption," she said, "but I didn't erase the knowledge. Someone had to finish the work, the right way." Tor's voice hardened. "You're continuing it." Emma stepped closer, her reflection aligning with his in the glass. two faces overlapping, one haunted, one calm. I'm correcting it, she said. The Harlans bred for purity. Samuel tried to force evolution, but what if the blood could evolve itself? She gestured toward the pods below. These aren't experiments, they're restorations. The genetic damage we carried, the inbreeding, the collapse, it can be undone. Not by control, not by hierarchy, by balance. Tors shook his head. That's what they said. Every monster thought they were fixing something. Emma's voice softened. Maybe monsters are just pioneers no one was ready for. She turned away, staring down at the light blue glow beneath the glass floor. One of the embryos is mine, she whispered, born from my cells, modified, not to be superior, just whole, free from the rot that started in those minds a century ago. Tors took a step closer. And if it isn't free, what if the blood remembers? Emma looked at him, the same eyes, the same widow's peak, but something colder behind them now. Then maybe remembering is part of evolution. She walked toward the exit, her boots silent against the polished floor. At the doorway she paused. Do you know what Samuel used to say? The blood must remain pure. She smiled faintly. He was right, just not in the way he thought. Purity isn't isolation, it's survival. And then she was gone. Tors looked back down at the glowing pods. One of them stirred, a hand pressing faintly against the glass from the inside. The pod's monitor flickered, displaying the genetic sequence in green code. The last line blinked. DNA analysis, 99.8% match subject, E. Marsh. Modification, active status, awake. Tors took a step back. The lights in the lab dimmed. The snow outside fell heavier. And through the reflection in the glass, he thought he saw movement, his own face, duplicated, altered, staring back with eyes that weren't his. Some bloodlines die in shame. Others evolve into legend. The difference is only who writes the record. The Harlan Report, Classified Archives, 2025. History doesn't bury monsters. It studies them, names them, files them away in archives and laboratories until the world forgets what made them monstrous in the first place. The Harlans were never just a family. They were a reflection of every empire, every dynasty, every bloodline that believed power was a birthright and purity was salvation. They built their kingdom on control and called it destiny. When Michael Tors found that cellar in 1994, he didn't just uncover a crime. He unearthed a mirror, one that forced humanity to see what happens when arrogance becomes science and faith becomes breeding. The Harlan bloodline didn't vanish. It adapted. It moved from chapel walls to corporate halls, from holy scripture to genetic code. Some say Emma Marsh died in the fire. Others say she became something else, a guardian of the same knowledge she once tried to destroy. But maybe the truth is simpler. You can burn a mansion. You can bury a name. But you can't kill what evolution has already accepted. The Harlan blood remembers. Not through memory or myth, but through the quiet persistence of design. The blood must remain pure. That was their creed, their curse, and perhaps humanity's next chapter.